Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories, here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. My name is Emma Daniels. I'm 34 years old. This happened in October 2024, though sometimes I still wonder if it really happened at all. Before I tell you what occurred in Yellow River State Forest, you should know that I was already damaged goods when I arrived there. 8 months earlier, a drunk driver had plowed into my car on Highway 76, sending me rolling down an embankment. I survived, but not without cost. A titanium rod in my left leg, lingering pain that medication barely touched, and nightmares that left me gasping for air. My husband, Marcus, wanted me to see a therapist. I chose a different path to healing. Photography had always been my escape. Before the accident, I'd built a modest career shooting wildlife for nature magazines. Being alone in the wilderness with just my camera and my German Shepherd Rex brought me peace that no therapist's office ever could. So, when autumn painted the forests of northeastern Iowa in brilliant crimson and gold, I decided it was time to reclaim my life. "It's too soon," Marcus said the night before I left, his voice tight with concern as he watched me pack my gear. "You're still limping. What if something happens out there?" I carefully folded a thermal shirt and added it to my backpack. "That's why I'm bringing Rex, and I've got my satellite phone, first aid kit, everything I need. The weather forecast is perfect for the dramatic lighting I want." I zipped the bag closed with finality. "Marcus, I need this. If I don't push myself now, I never will." He sighed, defeat evident in the slump of his shoulders. "Promise you'll check in twice a day, and no more than 3 nights. If I don't hear from you, you'll call in the National Guard," I finished, forcing a smile. "I promise." Rex whined softly from his bed in the corner, his amber eyes following our conversation. He was a magnificent animal, 90 pounds of muscle and intelligence with a black and tan coat that gleamed like polished wood. He'd been my constant companion for 6 years, and I trusted him more than most humans. "At least Rex has some sense," Marcus muttered, but he helped me load the car the next morning anyway. The drive to Yellow River State Forest took just over an hour from our home in Decorah. I'd chosen a remote area known as Horseshoe Hollow, famous among serious hikers for its challenging terrain and splendid vistas. The hollow was formed by a horseshoe-shaped ravine, cut by centuries of flowing water, now home to ancient oaks and maples. Most tourists stuck to the more accessible trails. Horseshoe Hollow required permits and was limited to experienced backpackers, perfect for someone seeking solitude and stunning photographs. I parked at the small gravel lot that marked the trailhead. Only one other vehicle was there, a mud-spattered pickup truck with local plates. The air held the crisp tang of autumn, and the forest blazed with color against a crystalline blue sky. Rex bounded from the car, eager to explore after the drive, but stayed close as I shouldered my pack and adjusted my camera bag. The trail started easily enough, winding through sun-dappled woods. My injured leg protested at first, then settled into a dull, familiar ache. I took my time, stopping often to photograph interesting fungi or particularly vivid leaves. Rex trotted ahead, occasionally disappearing around bends but always returning to check on me. By noon, we'd reached the first overlook, a rocky outcrop that provided a sweeping view of the hollow below. I set up my tripod and lost myself in composition and light. The valley was a painter's dream. Scarlet maples, golden hickories, and the emerald green of pines created a tapestry that seemed to glow from within. I spent nearly an hour shooting different angles before reluctantly packing up. The descent into the hollow was where the trail earned its reputation. Steep switchbacks required full attention, and my injured leg trembled with the effort of controlling each downward step. Sweat beaded on my forehead despite the cool air. Rex stayed closer now, as if sensing my discomfort. By late afternoon, we reached the spot I'd selected for our camp, a small clearing near a spring-fed stream. Exhaustion pulsed through my body as I unloaded my pack and set up the tent. The forest had grown quieter, the cheerful birdsong of midday replaced by the occasional rustle of creatures preparing for evening. I checked my phone. No signal, as expected. I'd need to use the satellite phone to check in with Marcus. I dug through my pack but couldn't immediately locate it. Frowning, I emptied the contents methodically onto my ground tarp. No satellite phone. A spike of anxiety shot through me. Had I left it in the car? No, I distinctly remembered packing it in the side pocket of my backpack. I checked again, then a third time. "Damn it," I muttered. Rex looked up from where he'd been drinking at the stream, head cocked questioningly. I took a deep breath. Maybe I had left it behind after all. It wasn't ideal, but I'd be back in 3 days. Marcus wouldn't panic until tomorrow evening at the earliest. I just have to be extra careful. As the light faded, I finished setting up camp and started my small cook stove. The temperature was dropping more rapidly than I'd anticipated. I consulted my topographic map by headlamp as I ate a simple meal of dehydrated stew. Tomorrow, I'd head deeper into the hollow to the area known as Witch's Cauldron, a secluded basin where the trees grew in unusual twisted forms that would make for haunting photographs. The night closed in around us, stars appearing in the velvet sky between the treetops. I fed Rex, then crawled into my tent while he took up his customary position just outside the entrance. Despite my exhaustion, sleep proved elusive. The forest was too quiet. No owls, no rustling of nocturnal creatures, just a heavy, waiting silence that pressed against my ears. I must have fallen asleep eventually because I woke suddenly to Rex's low growl. My watch read 3:17 a.m. Outside, the darkness was absolute. I fumbled for my headlamp. "What is it, boy?" I whispered, unzipping the tent slowly. Rex stood rigid, facing the darkness beyond our small camp, his growl continuous now. I swept the beam of my headlamp in the direction of his gaze. Nothing, just trees and shadows. But then, movement, just at the edge of the light's reach. A shadow detaching from the greater darkness, moving with fluid grace between the trees. Not a deer, not a bear. Something that seemed to flow rather than walk. "Hello?" I called, my voice embarrassingly thin. "Is someone there?" No response. The shadow melted back into the darkness. Rex's growl faded, but he remained alert, muscles tense beneath my hand on his back. "Probably just a raccoon," I told him, not believing it myself. "Come on, inside." I rarely let Rex sleep in the tent, but tonight I made an exception. His warm body pressed against mine was comforting as I drifted back into uneasy sleep. Morning brought fog so thick I could barely see 10 feet beyond the tent. I checked my watch, 9:30 a.m. I never slept that late, not even after the accident when pain medication knocked me out. The fog seemed to muffle all sound, creating a closed, intimate world around our campsite. Rex seemed anxious to leave. He paced as I made coffee and oatmeal, whining softly. "We're still going," I assured him, massaging my leg. It was stiffer than usual, the metal rod within feeling like an icicle in my bone. "Just let me wake up first." I reached for my medication in the side pocket of my backpack and found nothing. Heart racing, I emptied the pocket completely. No pill bottle. First the satellite phone, now this. Had I really been so careless? I tried to remember packing these items. The memory was there, but strangely fuzzy, like looking through the fog surrounding us. I could tolerate the pain, but without my anti-inflammatory medication, the hike would be much more difficult. By the time we set out, it was nearly noon, and the fog had lifted only slightly. I relied on my compass and map to navigate toward Witch's Cauldron. Rex stayed unusually close, occasionally making small, distressed sounds that I'd never heard from him before. An hour into our hike, I realized something was wrong. According to my map and compass, we should have been heading southwest, but the moss on the trees suggested we were moving north. I stopped, checked the compass again. The needle swung lazily, settling on a direction that couldn't possibly be correct based on the sun's position through the fog. "That's not right," I muttered, tapping the compass against my palm. The needle swung again, pointing in yet another impossible direction. A tendril of fear crept up my spine. I pulled out my phone, hoping against hope for a signal to access the GPS. The screen remained dark. I pressed the power button, held it. Nothing. Dead, though I'd charged it fully the night before. Rex whined, pressing against my leg. "It's okay," I said, as much to reassure myself as him. "We'll backtrack to camp and start fresh." We turned around, or what I thought was around, and began retracing our steps. The fog swirled around us, occasionally thinning to reveal glimpses of forest that looked nothing like what we'd passed through earlier. My injured leg throbbed, each step sending jolts of pain up to my hip. After 40 minutes of walking, we should have reached our campsite. Instead, we emerged into a small clearing I didn't recognize. In its center stood a massive oak tree, its trunk so wide it would have taken 3 people with outstretched arms to encircle it. The tree was ancient, with gnarled branches that twisted skyward like arthritic fingers. At its base, the roots formed a cage-like structure around what appeared to be a small spring. I approached slowly, drawn by the unusual formation. The water in the spring was clear but had an odd reddish tint, as if reflecting a sunset that wasn't there. A crude cup made from a gourd rested on one of the roots. "Hello there," a voice called, making me jump. An elderly woman emerged from the trees opposite us. She was small and wiry, dressed in practical hiking clothes that had seen better days. Her silver hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her face was a topography of wrinkles surrounding sharp, intelligent eyes. Rex's reaction was immediate and shocking. A snarl ripped from his throat, his hackles rising as he placed himself between me and the woman. I'd never seen him react this way to anyone. "Rex, stop it." I grabbed his collar, struggling to hold him back. "I'm so sorry. He's never like this." The woman seemed unperturbed. Animals sense things differently than we do. Perhaps I startled him. Her voice was melodic, with a slight accent I couldn't place. "I'm Esther Thornhill. I live nearby." "Emma Daniels," I replied automatically. "You live out here? I thought this was protected forest." Esther smiled, revealing surprisingly perfect teeth. "My family has been here since before this became state land. Grandfather clause in the deed." She gestured to the oak. "This is the heart of what once was our property. I still come to tend it." Rex continued to growl, straining against my grip. I was becoming increasingly uncomfortable. "We should go," I said. "I think we're lost. Our campsite should be nearby, but the fog, it does that here." Esther nodded sagely. "Horseshoe Hollow has its own weather, its own rules. People get turned around all the time." She studied me, taking in my obvious discomfort and my white-knuckled grip on Rex's collar. "You're hurt." It wasn't a question. I shifted my weight, trying to hide my limp. "Old injury, I'll be fine. You won't make it back to your camp today. Not with that leg, not with this fog." Esther pointed to the darkening sky visible through the canopy. "Storm's coming too. My cabin is just beyond those hemlocks. You're welcome to wait it out there." Every instinct told me to decline, but my options were limited. My leg was screaming, the pain no longer dull but sharp and insistent. Rex's behavior worried me, but he was just a dog. Perhaps he sensed a wild animal nearby that I couldn't detect. "That's very kind," I said finally, "just until the weather clears." Esther smiled again, and for a moment, just the briefest flash, her eyes seemed to reflect the same reddish tint as the spring water. Then she turned and began walking toward the hemlocks, moving with surprising agility for her age. I followed, practically dragging Rex, who continued to resist. "Come on," I hissed. "What's gotten into you?" The cabin was larger than I expected, a solidly built structure of weathered logs that seemed to grow from the forest floor rather than having been constructed upon it. Moss draped the north-facing walls, and the small windows were cloudy with age. A stone chimney rose from the center of the roof, thin smoke curling from its top. "It's not much," Esther said as she pushed open the heavy wooden door, "but it keeps me close to the forest." The interior was a single large room with a sleeping alcove visible behind a patchwork curtain. A wood stove occupied the center, providing both heat and a cooking surface. Bundles of dried herbs hung from the rafters, filling the air with a complex aroma of mint, sage, and something else, something acrid and unfamiliar. "Sit," Esther gestured to a rough-hewn chair by the stove. "I'll make tea for the pain." I hesitated. "How did you know I'm in pain?" Esther chuckled. "Girl, you're white as bone and sweating in 50-degree weather. Don't need to be a doctor to see you're hurting." She bustled about, filling a kettle from a barrel of water near the door. "That dog of yours can stay, but he'll need to calm down." Rex had backed himself into a corner, eyes fixed on Esther, a continuous low growl emanating from his chest. I'd never seen him like this. It frightened me more than I wanted to admit. "Rex," I said sharply, "enough." To my surprise, he fell silent, though his body remained tense. He lay down, head on paws, watching. Outside, the wind had picked up, whistling around the eaves of the cabin. I lowered myself into the chair, relief flooding through me as I took the weight off my leg. I hadn't realized how exhausted I was until that moment. Esther worked methodically, adding herbs to a small pot while the kettle heated. "You're a photographer," she said, nodding toward my camera bag. "Wildlife, mainly," I replied. "I came to capture the autumn colors." "Many have." Esther's voice held an odd note. "Not all capture what they expect." Before I could ask what she meant, she continued. "There was another, must be 2 years ago now. Young man, fancy equipment, said he was doing a book on forgotten places. Spent weeks in the hollow." She stirred the pot slowly. "Found his camera later. Never found him." A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the weather outside. "What happened to him?" Esther shrugged. "Hollow takes some people. Always has." She poured the steaming herbal mixture into a clay mug and handed it to me. "Drink. It will help with the pain." The liquid was bitter, but not unpleasant, with an underlying sweetness that bloomed after the initial taste. Almost immediately, warmth spread through my limbs, and the sharp pain in my leg receded to a manageable ache. "What's in this?" I asked, surprised by its effectiveness. "Family recipe," Esther said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Now rest. Storm will pass by morning." Despite my unease, my eyelids grew heavy. The combination of exhaustion, relief from pain, and the hypnotic patter of rain that had begun against the roof lulled me towards sleep. I fought it, struggling to maintain alertness. Something about this situation felt wrong, dangerous even, but my body betrayed me, and darkness closed in. I dreamed of roots, massive, writhing things that burrowed through earth and flesh with equal ease. They grew from the spring beneath the oak tree, spreading outward, seeking. In my dream, I saw them reach a campsite, my campsite, and coil around my tent, my supplies. Thin tendrils slipped into my backpack, extracting my satellite phone, my medication. Others probed the ground, the trees, reshaping the landscape subtly, and all the while a voice whispered, "Feed the roots, feed the roots. The mother hungers." I woke with a start, disoriented. The cabin was dark except for the dim glow of embers in the stove. Rain still drummed on the roof, but less insistently now. I fumbled for my watch. 2:43 a.m. I'd slept for hours. "Rex?" I whispered, suddenly aware that I couldn't see him in the gloom. "Rex, come here." No response. No familiar weight pressing against my leg. No sound of breathing. I struggled to my feet, ignoring the protest from my injured leg. The tea's effects had worn off, but the panic rising in my chest overshadowed the pain. "Rex!" I called louder, searching the corners of the cabin. Nothing. A soft chuckle came from the sleeping alcove. "Your dog left, girl? Went out when I opened the door for more firewood." Esther's voice was different now, deeper, with a grating quality that raised the hair on my arms. Animals know when something's not right, smarter than people that way. I turned slowly toward the alcove. The patchwork curtain was partially open, revealing a shape on the bed that couldn't possibly be the petite woman I'd met in the forest. This figure was larger, hunched, its silhouette all wrong. Too many angles, too many protrusions. "What have you done with my dog?" My voice shook despite my efforts to control it. The shape shifted, rising from the bed with a sound like dry branches breaking. "Nothing yet. He ran, but he'll be back." A sickening, wet sound, like lips smacking. They always come back for their people. I backed toward the door, my hand finding my camera bag where I'd left it by the chair. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I couldn't leave Rex. "What are you?" I whispered. The figure moved into the dim light cast by the stove embers. I wish I could say what I saw was a trick of shadows, a hallucination brought on by stress and pain. But what stood before me wore Esther's face like an ill-fitting mask stretched over something that was decidedly not human. The skin hung in loose folds in some places, pulled tight to tearing in others. The eyes were solid black now, reflecting no light. Most disturbing were the hands. No longer the gnarled but human hands of an elderly woman, but twisted appendages that more closely resembled roots than fingers, bark-like skin peeling to reveal glistening redness beneath. "The locals used to call me Old Mother Root," the thing said, voice bubbling as if through liquid. "Before they forgot, before they stopped leaving offerings, before they started calling this place Protected Land." She spat the last words. "Nothing protects them from me." I lunged for the door, yanking it open. The night air hit me like a physical blow, cold and heavy with moisture. I stumbled outside, terror overriding pain, overriding reason. "Rex!" I screamed into the darkness. "Rex, come!" Behind me, the thing that called itself Esther laughed, a sound like wind through dead leaves. "Run, girl. The hollow knows my voice. The trees are my eyes. The roots, my hands. Run." And I ran. Blindly, without direction, my only thought to put distance between myself and the cabin. Rain lashed my face and branches whipped my arms as I crashed through the underbrush. My injured leg threatened to buckle with each step, but fear kept me moving. I don't know how long I ran before exhaustion forced me to stop. I found myself in a small clearing, doubled over, lungs burning. The rain had stopped, but water dripped steadily from the canopy above. In the distance, a faint glow suggested approaching dawn. "Rex," I called weakly, hope fading. "Please, boy, come." A rustling in the underbrush made me freeze. Then, miraculously, a familiar form bounded into the clearing. Relief flooded through me as Rex approached, his outline unmistakable even in the dim light. "Oh, thank God," I sobbed, dropping to my knees and opening my arms. "Come here, boy. Come here." He came slowly, head low, not his usual exuberant greeting. Something in his gait was off. Still, I was so relieved to see him that I ignored the warning bells in the back of my mind. It wasn't until he was almost upon me that I saw his eyes. They were wrong, solid black. Like polished obsidian, like Esther's had become. No iris, no white, just depthless dark. I scrambled backward as Rex, or the thing wearing Rex's form, stalked closer. A low growl rumbled from his chest, but it wasn't his voice. It was lower, wetter, with harmonics that no canine throat could produce. "Rex," I whispered. "Rex, it's me. It's Emma." The creature cocked its head, a grotesque parody of Rex's familiar gesture. Then it smiled, a thing Rex could never do, revealing too many teeth, too sharply pointed with something dark and fibrous caught between them. "He hears you," said a voice that was not Rex's. Could never be Rex's. It was Esther's voice. Old Mother Root's voice coming from my dog's mouth. "He's still in here, scratching to get out. Shall I let him speak to you?" Before I could answer, Rex's form shuddered violently. His mouth opened wider than should be possible and a whimper emerged. Rex's voice, his real voice, filled with pain and confusion. "Emma," it whined. "Help me. She's inside. I can feel her roots. They're growing through me." Then the voice changed again, returning to the wet, bubbling laughter of Old Mother Root. "See, still alive in there. For now. Soon there will be nothing left but roots and hunger." I backed away, one agonizing step at a time. My hand closed around a fallen branch. Not much of a weapon, but better than nothing. The thing wearing Rex advanced slowly, savoring my fear. "Why are you doing this?" I demanded, trying to buy time, to think. "Because you're here," it replied simply. "Because you have life and pain to feed the roots. Because the hollow is mine, and all who enter it are mine to take." It lunged suddenly, impossibly fast. I swung the branch wildly, connecting with its side. The impact sent shockwaves up my arm, but the creature barely seemed to notice. It twisted in midair, jaws snapping closed an inch from my face as I fell backward. I scrambled to my feet, abandoning the useless branch. My camera bag still hung from my shoulder, the weight of it throwing off my balance. In desperation, I swung it at the advancing creature. The heavy metal tripod attached to the side connected with its head, producing a yelp of pain that sounded horribly like Rex. The creature backed away, shaking its head. Where the tripod had struck, the fur had split open, but instead of blood, a viscous green fluid oozed from the wound. Within the opening, I caught a glimpse of something writhing, not muscle or tissue, but thin, pale tendrils pulsing beneath the skin. "Iron!" the creature hissed, genuine pain in its voice. "You hurt us with cold iron." Understanding dawned. My tripod was made of iron alloy, lightweight but sturdy for wilderness photography. I unhooked it from my bag with shaking hands, holding it before me like a staff. The creature circled warily now, respect, or at least caution, in its movements. "It won't save you," it said. "The forest is mine. You'll tire, you'll sleep, and I'll be waiting." It was right. I couldn't stay awake forever, couldn't keep walking indefinitely. My leg was already trembling dangerously, and the adrenaline that had carried me this far was fading, leaving crushing exhaustion in its wake. But now I had a weapon, and more importantly, I had direction. The sky was lightening to the east, giving me orientation. If I could make it back to the trailhead, back to my car— "I'm sorry, Rex," I whispered, knowing that if my dog was still in there somehow, he would understand. Then I turned and began moving as quickly as my injured leg would allow toward the east. Behind me, the creature howled, a sound that began as Rex's bark but twisted into something ancient and hungry that echoed through the trees. The message was clear. The chase was on. I pushed my body mercilessly, using the tripod as both weapon and walking stick. The forest seemed to work against me. Roots rose from the ground to trip me, branches swung low to block my path, and the terrain grew increasingly steep and treacherous. The creature stalked me patiently, appearing occasionally at the edge of my vision, herding me subtly away from escape routes, forcing me deeper into the hollow. Once, it rushed me from behind, managing to sink teeth into my calf before I could swing the tripod around. The pain was explosive, white-hot, but the iron connected solidly with its skull, driving it back. By midday, I was moving on willpower alone. My injured leg dragged uselessly behind me, and fresh blood soaked my torn pant leg from the bite. The tripod had bent from repeated impacts. Rain began again, a cold drizzle that chilled me to the bone. I stumbled into another clearing and realized with horror that I'd traveled in a circle. Before me stood the massive oak tree with the spring at its base. In daylight, I could see what I'd missed before. The reddish tint in the water wasn't a reflection. The spring was filled with blood, or something close to it, bubbling gently from deep underground. "The heart," came Esther's voice, though I couldn't see her. "The heart of the hollow, the heart of Mother Root." I turned slowly, tripod raised. The creature that had been Rex emerged from the trees, moving stiffly now, green fluid leaking from multiple wounds where the iron had struck. Behind it came Esther, or what had been Esther, her form elongated and twisted, more root than woman now, her feet merging with the ground where she walked, leaving tendrils that sank into the earth with each step. "No more running," she said, approaching slowly. "No more iron to save you. Give yourself to the roots, girl. Feed the mother." The creature that had been Rex circled to my right, cutting off escape in that direction. Esther, old Mother Root, approached from the left. Behind me was the ancient oak and its bloody spring. I was trapped. My gaze fell on my camera bag, still somehow hanging from my shoulder despite everything. An idea formed. Desperate, probably futile, but the only option left. "I'll show you something," I said, my voice raw from exertion and fear. "Before you take me. A gift." Old Mother Root paused, curiosity evident in her twisted features. "A gift?" She sounded suspicious but intrigued. "Images," I said, slowly reaching for my camera. "Of the world beyond the hollow. Beautiful things. I'm a photographer, remember? Let me show you what I've seen." It was a gamble. If she was as old as she seemed, as tied to this place, perhaps she would be curious about the outside world. Perhaps that curiosity might buy me seconds. Seconds I desperately needed. "Show me," she commanded, moving closer. I removed my camera from the bag, making a show of turning it on, checking settings. The creature that had been Rex growled, less cautious than its mistress. "Beautiful things," I repeated, raising the camera to my eye as if to show her the display. Instead, I activated the flash, set to its highest power, and pressed the shutter directly in old Mother Root's face. The effect was instantaneous and more dramatic than I'd dared hope. She screamed, a sound so loud and inhuman it seemed to shake the trees themselves. Her hands, the twisted root-like appendages, flew to her face as she staggered backward. The sudden movement uprooted her feet from the ground, and she fell heavily. The creature that had been Rex leaped toward me, but I was already moving. I swung the tripod with all my remaining strength, connecting solidly with its head. The impact bent the tripod further, but sent the creature sprawling. I turned to run, but knew I wouldn't get far. Instead, I lurched toward the ancient oak. If this was the heart of the old Mother Root's power, perhaps it was also her vulnerability. I reached the spring, the metallic scent of the red liquid overwhelming at this distance. Without allowing myself to think about what I was doing, I plunged the damaged tripod into the depths of the spring. The reaction was immediate and terrifying. The ground beneath my feet heaved like a living thing in pain. A roar filled the air. Not a sound made by anything living, but the very earth itself crying out. The oak tree shuddered, its massive branches whipping violently. Behind me, old Mother Root's screams rose to a pitch that threatened to shatter my eardrums. I lost my balance as the ground continued to convulse, falling dangerously close to the spring. The red liquid had begun to boil, sending up clouds of foul-smelling steam. Something grabbed my ankle, one of the oak's roots, suddenly animate and purposeful. It pulled, dragging me toward the churning spring. In desperation, I grabbed my camera again and smashed it against the root. The electronics, the battery. Something caused the root to recoil momentarily. I scrambled backward, but more roots erupted from the ground around me, writhing like snakes. A weight hit me from behind. The creature that had been Rex recovered enough to attack. Its teeth sank into my shoulder, tearing through jacket and flesh. The pain was blinding. I rolled, trying to dislodge it, and we tumbled together down a short embankment away from the oak. For a moment, we lay tangled together, both too injured to move quickly. The creature's black eyes stared into mine from Rex's face. But something had changed. The unnatural blackness was receding from the edges, revealing slivers of familiar amber. "Rex," I whispered. A whimper escaped the creature's throat, a sound caught between Rex's normal bark and the wet growl of Old Mother Root. The creature, my Rex, was fighting her control. "Fight her," I gasped, blood soaking my jacket from the bite wound. "Rex, fight her." The amber in his eyes spread further, pushing back the unnatural blackness. His body convulsed, foam flecking his muzzle as two consciousnesses battled for control. I wanted to reach for him, to help somehow, but I couldn't move. My strength was fading, darkness creeping at the edges of my vision. Behind us, Old Mother Root's screams had transformed into a deep, resonant chant. The violent shaking of the ground continued, but it felt different now, purposeful rather than reactive. I managed to turn my head enough to see her standing before the oak, arms raised toward its thrashing branches. The red liquid from the spring had begun to climb the trunk, defying gravity, spreading through the bark like blood through veins. "The mother rises," she intoned, voice echoing unnaturally. "The mother takes what is hers." A crack like thunder split the air as one of the massive branches tore free from the trunk. Instead of falling, it hung suspended, writhing in the air before reshaping itself into a grotesque approximation of a limb, complete with root-like fingers that flexed and grasped at nothing. I knew with cold certainty that if Old Mother Root completed whatever transformation she had begun, neither I nor anyone else who entered Horseshoe Hollow would ever leave again. Beside me, Rex had gone still. I turned back to find his eyes fully amber again, Rex's eyes, watching me with intelligence and pain and loyalty. "Rex," I whispered, reaching a trembling hand to touch his muzzle. He whined softly, then struggled to his feet. Green fluid still leaked from his wounds, but his movements were his own again. He looked toward the oak, a growl building in his chest. His growl, not hers. Old Mother Root was nearly obscured now by swirling red mist rising from the spring. The oak's transformation continued, more branches reshaping themselves into limbs, the trunk splitting to form a cavernous opening like a mouth. Rex looked back at me, then toward the forest beyond, his intent clear. We needed to run, now, while Old Mother Root was distracted with her transformation. But I couldn't run. My leg had finally given out completely, and blood loss from the bite wounds was making me lightheaded. "Go," I told him. "Run, Rex. Get away." He wouldn't leave. Instead, he gripped my jacket sleeve in his teeth and pulled, trying to drag me away. The effort reopened his wounds, more green fluid pulsing from the tears in his fur. I realized with horror that whatever Old Mother Root had done to him wasn't fully reversed. The root-like structures were still inside him, still changing him. His temporary victory over her control wouldn't last. "My tripod," I gasped, an idea forming. "The iron, it's still in the spring." Rex seemed to understand. He released my sleeve and turned toward the oak. Old Mother Root was fully entranced now, oblivious to everything but the transformation taking place. Rex crept forward, belly low to the ground, moving with a hunter's stealth despite his injuries. I wanted to call him back, to tell him it was too dangerous, but he was already past the point where Old Mother Root might notice him. The ground still heaved and buckled, making his progress difficult, but he pressed on, amber eyes fixed on the spring. Old Mother Root's chanting reached a crescendo. The oak's transformation was nearly complete, a nightmarish fusion of tree and humanoid form that towered 30 feet above the ground. The mouth-like opening in the trunk yawned wider, red liquid dripping from wooden teeth. Rex reached the spring and without hesitation plunged his head beneath the surface. Old Mother Root sensed him too late. She whirled, her chant breaking, but Rex had already emerged with the bent tripod clenched in his jaws. "No!" she shrieked, lunging toward him. "The iron is mine. The hollow is mine." Rex dodged her grasp and raced back toward me, moving with desperate speed. Old Mother Root pursued, her body elongating unnaturally as she stretched across the distance between them. Behind her, the partially transformed oak shuddered, its movements becoming erratic without her guidance. Rex reached me, dropping the tripod at my side. I grasped it with bloodied hands, understanding what needed to be done. The iron had hurt her, hurt the roots she had planted in Rex, but it hadn't been enough to kill her. "I'm sorry," I whispered to Rex as I raised the tripod. His eyes met mine, filled with trust and something else. Understanding. He knew what had to happen. Old Mother Root was nearly upon us. "The roots are eternal," she hissed, her form fluctuating between woman and something ancient and terrible. "You cannot kill what has always lived." "No," I agreed, tightening my grip on the tripod. "But I can hurt you. I can make you remember pain." I swung the tripod not at her, but at Rex. The iron connected with his side, drawing a yelp of pain. Green fluid sprayed from the impact, but it was different now. Thinner, less viscous. The root-like structures within him were dying, withering under the iron's touch. "What are you doing?" Old Mother Root's voice held genuine confusion, then dawning horror as she realized my intent. I struck again and again, each blow drawing more fluid, more of her essence from Rex's body. He endured it without trying to escape, somehow knowing this was his only chance. Old Mother Root screamed with each impact, her form wavering as her connection to Rex weakened. "Stop!" she commanded, reaching for us with twisted hands. "The hollow will die without me. The forest will die." "The forest was here before you," I gasped, delivering another blow. "It will be here after you." The ground gave a final violent heave, then stilled. The oak collapsed in on itself, branches crashing down, the unnatural mouth dissolving back into ordinary bark. The spring bubbled once, twice, then went still, the red liquid fading to clear water. Old Mother Root's form contracted, shrinking back to human proportions. She looked almost like Esther again, an old woman on her knees in the dirt. Almost, but not quite. Her eyes remained black pools, and her hands were still twisted roots rather than human fingers. "You've wounded me," she said, her voice faint. "But the hollow is deep, and my roots deeper still. I will sleep, I will heal, and one day I will feed again." She began to sink into the ground, literally merging with the earth. In moments, only her face remained visible, a twisted mask of bark and flesh. "Remember me when you look over your shoulder in the dark," she whispered, and then she was gone, leaving only disturbed soil to mark where she had been. The forest fell silent. Even the wind had stopped. I dropped the bent tripod, my hands shaking uncontrollably. Rex collapsed beside me, his breathing shallow but steady. The green fluid had stopped flowing from his wounds, replaced by normal canine blood. "Good boy," I told him, running my hand over his matted fur. "The best boy." I don't remember much of what happened next. Somehow, I found the strength to bandage the worst of our wounds using supplies from my camera bag. Somehow, we began the long, painful journey back toward the trailhead. The forest no longer seemed to work against us. The paths stayed paths. The compass pointed true. By nightfall, we'd reached my original campsite, finding it undisturbed except for a dusting of leaves and twigs. We slept there, huddled together in my tent, Rex's body warm against mine. His eyes remained amber, with no trace of the unnatural blackness. But he was changed. We both were. Something of Old Mother Root remained in him, evident in the way plants seemed to lean toward him as we passed, in the way small woodland creatures fled from his approach when they never had before. It took us another full day to reach the trailhead. My car sat where I'd left it, looking impossibly normal, impossibly connected to the world I'd known before entering the hollow. The other vehicle, the mud-spattered pickup, was gone. I managed to drive us to the nearest ranger station. The story I told them was simple and believable. We'd gotten lost, been attacked by a wild animal, needed medical attention. They called an ambulance and then the local sheriff. Sheriff Dale Perkins was a heavyset man with perpetually narrowed eyes and a drawl that suggested he'd never been in a hurry for anything. He took my statement with visible skepticism. "Ain't no record of a woman named Esther Thornhill living out there," he said, flipping through his notepad. "No record of any cabins in that section of the park either, not for 50 years or more." "She said her family had been there since before it was state land," I insisted, though my voice sounded unconvincing even to my own ears. "Uh-huh." Sheriff Perkins scratched his stubbled chin. "And this animal that attacked you and your dog wasn't a bear or a cougar, you're sure of that?" "It was. I don't know what it was." His expression made it clear what he thought. Trauma, blood loss, maybe the pain medication the paramedics had given me. Or worse, another unstable person seeing things in the woods. I couldn't entirely blame him. "We'll look into it," he said finally, which we both knew meant they wouldn't. "You focus on getting yourself patched up. That leg looks bad." It was. The doctors at the small regional hospital found infection setting in around the bite wounds. They pumped me full of antibiotics and tried, unsuccessfully, to make me leave Rex at a veterinary hospital. In the end, Marcus arrived and smoothed things over, arranging for a vet to treat Rex in my hospital room, against all protocols. "What happened out there?" Marcus asked when we were finally alone, his face lined with worry. I told him the truth, about getting lost, about Esther, about Old Mother Root and what she had done to Rex, about what I had been forced to do to save us both. I showed him the photographs still on my camera's memory card, though the most crucial images had been lost when I smashed it against the oak's root. He listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he took my hand, careful of the IV line. "I believe that you believe it," he said finally. It was as much as I could have hoped for, more than the doctors believed when I tried to explain the strange green residue they'd found in Rex's wounds, more than the forest rangers believed when I described the massive oak with the spring at its base, which they claimed didn't exist in Horseshoe Hollow. We went home a week later, Rex and I both healing but forever changed. The veterinarians found no explanation for the alterations in Rex's physiology, subtle things that showed up on tests but presented no immediate danger. Slightly elevated chlorophyll levels in his blood, unusual cellular structures in tissue samples, an MRI that showed what looked like fine root systems running alongside his normal canine nervous system. Anomalous, they called it, unprecedented. But not life-threatening, at least for now. I never returned to Yellow River State Forest, but I kept tabs on it from a distance. News reports of hikers going missing, scientific papers about unusual botanical specimens found in Horseshoe Hollow, a local legend, growing quietly, about an old woman who appears to lost travelers on foggy days. As for me, I healed, mostly. The limp remains, worse now, the rod in my leg a constant reminder. I still have nightmares about roots growing through my bones, about amber eyes turning black and depthless. Rex sleeps beside our bed now, never in it. Some nights I wake to find him staring out the window toward the east, toward Yellow River, a soft whine building in his throat. But the strangest thing, the thing I've told no one, not even Marcus, is the small growth on my calf where the creature bit me. It began as a raised scar, unusual but not alarming. Then it developed a greenish tint. Small fibrous tendrils appeared beneath the skin surrounding it. The doctors called it keloid scarring, nothing to worry about, but sometimes when I'm alone, I swear I can feel it pulse with my heartbeat. And once, after a particularly vivid nightmare about the hollow, I woke to find small thread-like roots extending from the scar into the sheets. I cut them off immediately, my hands shaking, and they haven't returned. But I know they will. Old Mother Root's final words haunt me still. The hollow is deep, and my roots deeper still. I will sleep. I will heal. and one day I will feed again. I believe her. The roots within Rex, the roots within me, they're seeds, waiting, patient, eternal. And sometimes on foggy nights when pain keeps me awake, I wonder, how far do her roots really reach? How many of us carry pieces of her without knowing? How many lost hikers, injured wildlife, or wandering pets have spread her influence beyond Horseshoe Hollow? I don't know the answers. I only know that I check my leg every morning for new growth and that I've started planting an herb garden filled with iron shavings mixed into the soil. Rex stays close now, never wandering. His eyes remain amber, but sometimes in certain lights I catch glimpses of shadow moving beneath the surface. Roots stirring, remembering. Old Mother Root is waiting. And so are we. My name is Lucas Hartman. I'm 34 years old. This happened in October 2024, though sometimes I still wonder if time itself wasn't another victim in Yellow River State Forest. I used to be an accountant at Mercer Financial in Des Moines. Used to be. I can't focus on spreadsheets anymore, not since what happened in those woods. The doctors call it PTSD. They don't believe me when I tell them that Walter Fisher is still out there, that he's watching me, that what lives inside him isn't human and never was. It was supposed to be a simple camping trip. 3 days in northeastern Iowa, hiking the trails of Yellow River State Forest. A chance to clear my head after my breakdown at work 3 weeks earlier when I'd stormed out of a client meeting, screaming about meaningless numbers and wasted lives. My boss had suggested I take some personal time. Marcus Bennett, my colleague from the analytics department and probably my only real friend, had proposed the trip. "Nature, man, it fixes everything," he'd said with that wide, earnest smile that made it impossible to say no to him. "Emma and I go every fall. The colors are insane right now." Emma Wilson was Marcus's girlfriend of 2 years. Brilliant woman, environmental scientist with a quiet intensity that always made me slightly uncomfortable. But Marcus loved her, and I needed something, anything, to pull me out of my spiral. The first day went perfectly. We'd arrived at the Paint Creek Unit campground around noon, set up our tents in a secluded spot near Big Paint Creek, and spent the afternoon hiking the bluff trails. The autumn forest was a riot of gold and crimson, and the limestone cliffs offered vertigo-inducing views of the valley below. For the first time in months, my chest didn't feel tight. I could breathe. That night, around the campfire, Emma had been unusually quiet. "You feeling okay?" Marcus asked her, passing her a metal cup of the whiskey he'd smuggled in. "Just tired," she said, but I caught her staring into the darkness beyond our campsite, her pupils dilated despite the fire's brightness. "Does anyone else hear that?" Marcus and I both listened. Nothing but the gentle rustle of leaves and the occasional distant owl. "Hear what?" I asked. Emma blinked rapidly, then shook her head. "Nothing. Thought I heard someone calling my name." The second day is when everything changed. We planned to hike the challenging forked trail to the north, a steep path that wound through ravines and across several creek crossings. Marcus had the GPS on his phone, guiding us while I navigated with an old-school paper map from the ranger station. 3 hours in, Marcus frowned at his phone. "That's weird. GPS is glitching." "What do you mean?" I asked, moving beside him to look. The blue dot representing our location was jumping erratically, sometimes showing us miles from where we stood. "Battery's at 95%, but the signal keeps dropping," he muttered. "Old-fashioned way, then," I said, unfolding my map. But something was wrong with that, too. The trail markings didn't match what we were seeing. According to the map, we should have crossed Heffern's Creek 20 minutes ago, but there was no creek in sight. "Maybe we took a wrong turn," Emma suggested, but her voice sounded distant, detached. I looked up to find her staring at the canopy overhead, where the branches swayed despite the absence of wind. When she lowered her gaze to meet mine, something in her eyes made my stomach clench. For just a moment, they didn't look like Emma's eyes at all. Around noon, the sky darkened prematurely. What had been forecasted as a clear day suddenly threatened rain. The temperature dropped 15 degrees in minutes, and the wind picked up, howling through the trees. "We need shelter," Marcus shouted over the rising storm. "Map, show anything close?" I shook my head. "Nothing marked. Ranger said this area is pretty remote." The first fat raindrops hit us like ice pellets. Within seconds, we were drenched. Thunder boomed directly overhead, and lightning illuminated the rapidly darkening forest. We stumbled forward, hoping to find some natural shelter when Emma suddenly stopped. "There," she said, pointing into the trees where no path existed. "I see a cabin." Marcus and I exchanged glances. I saw nothing but dense undergrowth and shadowed pines. "Are you sure?" I asked, but Emma was already pushing through the brambles, moving with purpose. We followed her through a tangle of vegetation that seemed to scratch and grab at our clothing. Just as I was about to call for her to stop, the trees thinned, and there it was, a small log cabin nestled against the base of a cliff, smoke curling from its stone chimney. "That's impossible," I whispered. "This isn't on any map." Marcus shrugged, relief evident in his expression. "Who cares? It's shelter." Before we could discuss further, the cabin door swung open. A lean, weathered man in his late 60s stood framed in the doorway. He wore faded flannel and had a thick gray beard that couldn't hide the deep lines etched into his face. His eyes were startlingly clear and blue, almost luminous against his tanned skin. "Well now," he called out, voice like gravel but oddly cheerful. "You folks look half drowned. Better come in before that sky falls completely." Something about his smile made my skin crawl, but another crash of thunder decided for us. We hurried toward the cabin. "Walter Fisher," the man said as we crossed his threshold. "Most folks call me Walt. Don't get many hikers this deep in the backcountry." "We got lost," Marcus explained. "GPS went crazy." Walt's laugh was strange, too high for such a weathered frame. "Technology," he scoffed. "Useless out here. Yellow River's got its own ideas about who belongs and who doesn't." The cabin interior was a single room, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. Animal pelts covered nearly every surface. Deer, fox, what looked like a coyote. But it was the masks that drew my attention. Dozens of handcrafted wooden masks hung on the walls, each carved with distorted human features, mouths frozen in silent screams. "Family tradition," Walt said, noticing my stare. "My grandfather taught my father, who taught me. Each one's got a story." He gestured to a particularly disturbing mask with hollowed eye sockets. "That one there's inspired by a fellow accountant who passed through here, 15 years back. Had himself a breakdown at work. Numbers man, like you, Lucas." I froze. "I never said I was an accountant." Walt's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Didn't you? Memory must be slipping in my old age." Marcus shot me a confused look, but my attention was on Emma. She stood transfixed before a mask depicting a woman's face with antlers sprouting from the forehead. Her hand reached toward it, trembling. "That one's not finished yet," Walt said softly, "still waiting for the right inspiration." Outside, the storm intensified. Walt insisted we stay until it passed, offering us hot coffee laced with something that smelled like herbs but tasted bitter and metallic. I tried to refuse, but Marcus and Emma accepted readily. "So, how long have you lived out here?" Marcus asked, always the sociable one. Walt settled into a handmade rocking chair. "Oh, I've always been here, one way or another. This forest remembers me, just like it'll remember you." Emma drained her cup, then stood abruptly. "I need some air," she announced, her voice oddly flat. "Storm's still raging," I protested. "Just on the porch," she said, already moving to the door. Before I could object further, she slipped outside. Walt watched her go, that unnerving smile playing at his lips. "She hears them already," he said, almost to himself. "Here's what?" Marcus asked, setting down his cup. "The whispers," Walt replied. "Not everyone does. She's sensitive, special." "I should check on her," Marcus said, rising, but Walt's hand shot out with surprising speed, gripping his wrist. "Let her listen," he said. "It's rude to interrupt." I stood up, suddenly wanting nothing more than to grab my friends and flee this cabin and its unsettling owner. "We've imposed enough. We should go, storm or not." Walt released Marcus and leaned back. "Suit yourself. But night falls quick here, and the trails aren't marked. Easy to get turned around, especially with the others watching." "The others?" Marcus asked. Walt gestured vaguely toward the windows. "The ones who were here first. The ones who never left." He fixed his gaze on me. "The ones who know about your little episode in that meeting room, Lucas, throwing papers, screaming about meaningless numbers. Quite the scene." My blood ran cold. I'd told no one but Marcus about the specifics of my breakdown. I grabbed Marcus's arm. "We're leaving, now." Outside, the rain had mysteriously stopped, though the sky remained an unnatural greenish gray. Emma stood at the edge of the small clearing, her back to us, head tilted as if listening. "Emma," Marcus called, "we're going." She didn't respond. When Marcus reached her and touched her shoulder, she turned so slowly it seemed deliberate. Her expression was blank, eyes unfocused. "Emma?" Marcus's voice held a note of fear now. She blinked several times, then seemed to return to herself. "Sorry, I thought I heard something in the trees." "We need to go," I said firmly, glancing back at the cabin where Walt stood in the doorway, watching us with that unnerving smile. We hurried away, plunging back into the forest with no clear direction except away from the cabin. I pulled out my map again, trying to orient ourselves, but the paper had become damp and the ink had run, turning the trails into meaningless smears. "Check your GPS again," I told Marcus. He pulled out his phone. "Dead," he said. "Was at 90% before we got to the cabin." Emma's phone was dead too, so was mine. "Let's just head downhill," I suggested. "We'll hit a creek eventually, and all the creeks in this area flow toward the Yellow River." We walked for what felt like hours. The forest grew denser, the undergrowth more tangled. Twice we had to backtrack when our path ended in impenetrable thickets. The trees seemed to close in around us, branches reaching like fingers. What was strangest, though, was the silence. No birds called, no insects buzzed. Even our footfalls seemed muffled, as if the forest absorbed sound itself. As daylight began to fade, panic set in. We had no choice but to make camp for the night. We found a small clearing and set up our tents with shaking hands. Our wet clothes clung to us, and the temperature was dropping rapidly. "We need a fire," Marcus said, dropping his pack. "I'll gather wood." "I'll help," Emma offered. "No," Marcus and I said simultaneously. "Something told me we shouldn't separate." "I'll go," Marcus insisted. "You two set up camp. I won't go far." Before I could protest further, he disappeared into the trees. Emma and I worked in tense silence, setting up the tents. Twice I caught her staring into the forest, lips moving silently as if in conversation with someone I couldn't see. When I asked her about it, she denied it. As darkness fell completely, my worry about Marcus grew. He should have returned by now. "I'm going to look for him," I told Emma, switching on my flashlight. "He's fine," she said, her voice eerily calm. "He's with the others now." I stared at her. "What did you say?" She looked confused. "I said he's probably fine. He knows what he's doing." But that wasn't what I'd heard. I hesitated, torn between searching for Marcus and not wanting to leave Emma alone. Before I could decide, twigs snapped nearby. My flashlight beam caught Marcus emerging from the trees, arms full of branches. "Sorry that took so long," he said, dumping the wood at our feet. "Got a bit turned around." Relief flooded me, but it was short-lived. As Marcus knelt to arrange the firewood, I noticed something off about his movements. They were too fluid, too precise. And when he looked up at me, his smile was wrong somehow. Too wide. His eyes didn't crinkle at the corners the way they usually did. "Everything okay, Lucas?" he asked, and even his voice seemed slightly different, the cadence a beat too slow. "Fine," I lied. "Just tired." We managed to get a fire started, but the flames burned with an odd bluish tint that cast sickly light over our small camp. None of us mentioned it. Marcus suggested we eat, pulling food from his pack. I watched in horror as he opened a sealed package of beef jerky to reveal black mold coating each piece. Our trail mix was crawling with maggots. Every bit of food had rotted. "That's impossible," I breathed. "We just packed this yesterday." Emma seemed unfazed. "I'm not hungry anyway," she said, staring into the blue flames. Marcus, or whatever was pretending to be Marcus, tossed the rotten food aside. "We'll find something in the morning." That night, I lay awake in my tent, listening. Marcus and Emma had taken the other tent as planned, but I could hear them whispering for hours. Not their voices, not quite, but something using their vocal cords to produce sounds that were almost, but not quite, words. Sometime in the middle of the night, I heard the zipper of their tent open. Through a slit in my tent flap, I watched Emma emerge and walk slowly into the forest. She wore only her thin t-shirt despite the cold, moving with unnatural grace, never looking down at the uneven ground. Against my better judgment, I followed her. She moved quickly, weaving through trees without hesitation as if following a path only she could see. I struggled to keep up while staying quiet enough not to alert her. After 10 minutes of this strange pursuit, she stopped in a small clearing where moonlight filtered through the canopy. Emma knelt on the forest floor and began to dig with her bare hands, muttering in what sounded like Latin mixed with something far older. The dirt seemed to part easily for her, as if the earth itself was helping her excavate. When the hole was about 2 feet deep, she reached into it and pulled out something that made my breath catch. A wooden mask, similar to the ones in Walt's cabin but older, its surface black with age or blood. She pressed it to her face, still murmuring those strange words. I must have made some sound then, a gasp or the snap of a twig underfoot, because she suddenly went still, then turned her head toward my hiding place with horrible, mechanical precision. The mask covered her features, but through its eye holes, I saw nothing but darkness where her eyes should have been. I ran. Branches whipped my face and thorns tore at my clothing, but I didn't slow down. Behind me, I heard something pursuing, not the sound of human footsteps, but a rhythmic thudding punctuated by what sounded like hooves striking stone. I burst into our campsite, expecting to find the Marcus thing waiting, but the camp was empty. Both tents stood open, firelight still flickering with that unnatural blue flame. Without thinking, I grabbed my backpack and Marcus's, then plunged into the forest in a different direction, away from whatever was chasing me and away from the camp. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to give out. When I finally stopped, gasping for breath, I found myself in front of a limestone bluff. Moonlight revealed a narrow crevice in the rock face, just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Hearing crashing in the underbrush behind me, I pressed into the opening without hesitation. The crevice widened into a small cave. My flashlight revealed a space about 15 feet deep and 10 feet wide. And that's when I saw them. The bodies. Or what remained of them. 3 hikers, their desiccated corpses propped against the far wall, wooden masks affixed to their faces. Each mask was unique, carved to capture what I somehow knew was the essence of the person who wore it. Their terror, their surrender. Bile rose in my throat. I stumbled backward, only to freeze at the sound of something large moving past the cave entrance. I killed my flashlight and pressed myself against the cold stone wall, hardly daring to breathe. "Lucas," came a sing-song voice that was almost, but not quite, Emma's. "I can smell your fear. It's delicious." I remained motionless, eyes screwed shut as if that could somehow hide me from whatever she had become. "Walt says you'll make a beautiful mask," she continued, her voice echoing strangely. "Your fear is so pure." Minutes passed like hours. Eventually, the sounds outside faded. I waited until my watch showed 5 a.m. before daring to move again. Dawn would break soon. Maybe daylight would offer some protection. As I prepared to leave my grim shelter, my flashlight caught something scratched into the cave wall near the bodies. A crude map showing what had to be Yellow River State Forest. Several areas were marked with strange symbols, one of which matched our campsite location exactly. Another mark showed what had to be Walt's cabin. But it was the third mark that drew my attention. A circle with an X through it, accompanied by the scratched words, "Real Marcus." My heart nearly stopped. If the Marcus in our camp wasn't the real Marcus, I had to find him. The real him. Using the crude map as a guide, I set out at first light. The forest seemed different in daylight, less menacing but no less strange. Twice I passed the same distinctive lightning-struck tree, though I'd walked in a straight line. Time itself felt wrong. My watch showed 9 a.m. for what seemed like hours. The mark on the cave map led me to a ravine I hadn't noticed before. At its bottom lay a crude structure, a cage made of branches and vines, too deliberately constructed to be natural. Inside, Marcus lay curled in a fetal position, clothes torn and muddied. Real Marcus. "Marcus!" I hissed, sliding down the ravine side. He stirred weakly, raising his head. His face was bruised, one eye swollen shut. "Lucas," he croaked. "Is that really you?" "It's me," I assured him, examining the cage for a way to open it. The branches were lashed together with some kind of sinew that felt disturbingly like dried tendons. "Be careful," Marcus warned. "They're everywhere. They look like us, but they're not us." "I know," I said, working at the knots. "What happened to you?" "I was gathering firewood when I heard Emma scream," he said, wincing as he sat up. "I ran toward the sound, but it kept moving, leading me deeper into the forest. Then something hit me from behind." He touched a matted spot on the back of his head. "When I woke up, I was here, and Walt was standing over me with that smile. I finally loosened the bindings enough to create an opening. Marcus crawled out, legs barely supporting him. "Emma?" he asked. I hesitated. "Something's wrong with her. She's working with Walt, or something's inside her now." Marcus's face crumpled. "I was afraid of that. She's been having these episodes for weeks. Blackouts, speaking languages she doesn't know. I thought it was stress from her work." "We need to get out of here," I said, helping him to his feet. "Can you walk?" He nodded grimly. "We can't leave Emma." "The Emma we knew is gone," I said, though the words broke something inside me. "Whatever's wearing her face now isn't human." "She might still be in there," Marcus insisted. "We have to try." I wanted to argue, but knew he was right. If there was any chance. We made our way back toward the camp, Marcus leaning heavily on me. The forest seemed to be working against us. Paths disappeared, familiar landmarks shifted position. It should have been a 30-minute walk, but the sun had passed its zenith by the time we spotted the blue smoke of our campfire. We approached cautiously. Through the trees, I could see the Emma thing sitting by the fire, carving something with a knife. The Marcus thing was nowhere in sight. "We need a distraction," I whispered, "and weapons." Marcus pointed to a fallen branch thick as my arm. I nodded and picked it up, testing its weight. Not much, but better than nothing. "I'll draw them away," Marcus said. "You get to Emma. Try to, break whatever spell she's under." Before I could protest this suicidal plan, Marcus had grabbed a rock and hurled it far to our right. It crashed through the underbrush, immediately catching the Emma thing's attention. She rose with that same unnatural grace, head tilted in bird-like curiosity, then moved toward the sound. Marcus circled around to make more noise from a different direction. I lost sight of him but could hear him crashing through the forest, drawing the Emma thing further away. I crept toward the camp, branch raised. Our tents were torn open, contents scattered. My backpack had been sliced to ribbons. The strange blue fire still burned without consuming its fuel. A sound behind me made me whirl around. The Marcus thing stood there, smiling that too wide smile. "You found your way back," it said in that almost but not quite Marcus voice. "Walt said you would. The clever ones always do." I gripped my branch tighter. "What are you?" "I'm Marcus," it said, smile widening impossibly. "Your friend. Your only friend, Lucas. Who else would put up with your pathetic breakdowns? Your obsessive behaviors?" I swung the branch hard, catching it across the face. It didn't flinch, didn't even blink, but its features seemed to slip for just a moment, like a mask sliding on sweaty skin. "What did you do to the real Marcus?" I demanded. "I am the real Marcus," it insisted, but its voice had changed, deepening to a gravelly tone I recognized with horror. Walt's voice. "Marcus is just a vessel. Like Emma. Like you will be." It lunged at me with inhuman speed. I swung again, connecting with its shoulder. The thing laughed, a horrible sound that echoed too loudly in the small clearing. Its hand caught my branch on the next swing, snapping it like a twig. I stumbled backward, tripping over the scattered camping gear. My hand closed around Marcus's cooking pot, a small cast-iron one he'd insisted on bringing for proper camping coffee. I brought it up just as the thing pounced, smashing it into the side of its head. The blow should have knocked a normal man unconscious. Instead, I heard a sickening tear. The thing's face split along its cheek, revealing not blood and bone, but a glimpse of grayish, writhing matter beneath. The wound closed almost instantly, but not before I saw what looked like tiny black worms knitting the flesh back together. It hissed in pain or anger, circling me now with predatory focus. I backed toward the fire, searching desperately for another weapon. "Walt has worn many faces over the centuries," it said conversationally, as if we were discussing the weather. "Yours will be one of his favorites, I think. So much delicious anxiety behind those eyes." My heel hit something, Marcus's backpack. I remembered the camping hatchet he always packed. If I could just reach it. A scream tore through the forest, Marcus's voice raw with agony. The thing wearing his face smiled. "Sounds like Emma found your friend." In that moment of distraction, I dropped to my knees, yanking open Marcus's pack. My fingers closed around the hatchet handle just as the thing lunged again. I swung without thinking, putting all my strength behind it. The blade bit deep into its neck. Black ichor sprayed across my face, burning like acid wherever it touched. The thing shrieked, a sound no human throat could make, and staggered backward. Its form seemed to ripple, features melting and reforming. For a moment I saw Walt's face superimposed over Marcus's, then something else. Something with too many eyes and a mouth that opened vertically. I didn't wait to see more. I ran toward the direction of Marcus's scream, hatchet still clutched in my white-knuckled grip. I found them in a small clearing 50 yards away. Marcus was on his knees, blood streaming from a gash across his forehead. Emma, or the thing that had been Emma, stood over him, holding a crude stone knife to his throat. But instead of Emma's face, she wore one of those wooden masks, this one adorned with antlers that seemed to grow directly from the wood. "Stop!" I shouted. The masked figure turned slowly toward me. "Lucas," it said, voice distorted by the mask. "You're just in time for the offering." "Let him go," I demanded, raising the hatchet. "You don't understand what's happening here," it said. "What's been happening since long before this forest had a name. The others were here first. They hunger. They must be fed." "Emma," Marcus pleaded, "I know you're still in there. Fight it." The masked figure's head twitched violently. "Emma is gone," it growled, but the voice had changed, uncertainty creeping in. "She was weak, receptive, the perfect vessel. She loved you. Marcus, I said, taking a cautious step forward. Remember that weekend at Lake McBride last summer? How she stayed up all night with you when you got food poisoning? That's the real Emma. The masked figure trembled visibly now. Stop, it hissed, but Emma's voice broke through. Marcus, help me. Marcus lunged upward despite the knife, grabbing the mask. They struggled, falling to the ground. I rushed forward to help, but before I could reach them, Emma let out an inhuman shriek. The mask seemed to have fused to her skin, and as Marcus pulled, her flesh came with it. I'm sorry, Marcus sobbed, still pulling. I'm so sorry, Emma. With a wet, tearing sound, the mask came free. Beneath it, Emma's face was intact but changed, her eyes completely black, mouth stretched in a silent scream. From the torn edges of the mask, those same tiny black worms I'd seen on the Marcus thing wriggled and squirmed. Emma's body convulsed violently, back arching off the ground. Marcus held her, weeping, as a dark substance like oil began to pour from her eyes, nose, and mouth. We need to go, I urged, pulling at Marcus's shoulder. Now. I can't leave her, he cried. She's gone, Marcus. Look at her. Whatever's inside her is still fighting to get out. As if to confirm my words, Emma's body went rigid, then relaxed completely. Her eyes, normal again but vacant, stared sightlessly at the forest canopy. For a moment, I thought it was over. Then her lips parted in a smile that was pure Walt. You can't escape the forest, she said in Walt's gravelly voice. It remembers you now. Behind us, branches snapped. The Marcus thing was coming, wounded but not stopped by the hatchet blow. I yanked Marcus to his feet. Run! We crashed through the forest, direction meaningless, driven by pure terror. Behind us, sounds of pursuit. Not one follower but many, moving through the trees with unnatural speed. The river, Marcus gasped as we ran. If we can find the Yellow River, we can follow it out. It was our only hope. I tried to orient myself, remembering from the map that the river ran roughly east to west through the forest. The sun was setting to our left, which meant west was... But the sun shouldn't be setting already. It had been midday moments ago. Time was wrong here. Direction was wrong. Everything was wrong. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs threatened to give out. The forest grew darker by the minute, shadows stretching impossibly long. Twice we passed the same lightning-struck tree I'd seen earlier, though we'd never changed direction. Just as despair threatened to overwhelm me, I heard it. The faint sound of running water. This way, I gasped, pulling Marcus toward the sound. We broke through a line of trees and there it was, the Yellow River, its muddy waters reflecting the last light of day. Relief flooded me until I realized what was wrong with this scene. The river was flowing uphill. That's not possible, Marcus whispered beside me. From the trees behind us came sounds of pursuit drawing closer. We had no choice. Doesn't matter, I said. We follow it out. We splashed into the shallows, wading along the bank where the current was weakest. The water was ice cold and seemed to cling to our legs with deliberate resistance, but it was safer than the forest now. Night fell with unnatural suddenness, plunging us into darkness broken only by faint moonlight on the water. We stumbled along the riverbank for what felt like hours, guided only by the sound of flowing water and the occasional glimpse of the moon through the trees. "Lucas," Marcus said suddenly, his voice tight with fear. "Look." Across the river, standing motionless on the opposite bank, was Walt. Even in the darkness I could see his smile. Beside him stood the Emma thing, her face still streaked with that black substance. And beside her, the Marcus thing, its neck still torn and leaking dark fluid. "The river remembers too," Walt called across the water. "It brings everyone back to me eventually." As he spoke, more figures emerged from the trees behind him. People of all ages, all wearing those horrible wooden masks, all standing unnaturally still. "Run," I whispered to Marcus, and we did, splashing desperately through the shallows, no longer caring about noise or direction, just away from those watching figures. A root caught my foot and I went down hard, face striking a submerged rock. Dazed, I felt Marcus haul me up, blood streaming from a gash in my forehead. Through blurred vision, I saw lights ahead, actual electric lights. "The campground," Marcus gasped. "We're nearly there." With renewed energy, we pushed forward. Behind us, inhuman howls echoed through the darkness. The lights grew closer, the main campground of Yellow River State Forest, with its ranger station and parking lot. As we burst from the tree line into the illuminated campground, I risked a glance back. Walt stood at the forest edge, his blue eyes reflecting the artificial light like an animal's. He raised one hand in what might have been farewell. "Remember," he called. The forest remembers. Then he was gone, melting into the shadows like he'd never existed. We stumbled into the ranger station, wild-eyed and bloody, babbling about monsters and skinwalkers and masks that consumed people's souls. The rangers called an ambulance and the police. They searched the forest for Emma but found nothing. Not her body, not her belongings, not a single trace that she'd ever been there. The official report listed her as missing, presumed dead from exposure or animal attack. I wanted to tell them about Walt, about his cabin, but when search teams went to the coordinates I provided, they found nothing but undisturbed forest. No cabin, no masks, no Walt. They found our original campsite, though, ransacked and abandoned exactly as we'd left it, but there was no sign of the strange blue fire or the rotten food, no evidence of the horror we'd experienced. Marcus was hospitalized for 2 weeks, dehydration, malnutrition, and a severe concussion. I got off lighter with just a gash on my forehead that required 15 stitches. The physical wounds healed, the others never will. The doctors diagnosed us with shared traumatic delirium, said we'd gotten lost, become dehydrated, and our minds had constructed an elaborate shared hallucination to explain our terror. They pointed to my previous breakdown as evidence of my fragile mental state. Marcus, they suggested, had been influenced by my delusion. It was easier to accept their explanation than to believe what we knew was true. Marcus tried. He moved to Seattle 3 months later, cut off all contact. Last I heard, he was heavily medicated and seeing a trauma therapist 3 times a week. I couldn't pretend. Not when I still see Walt's face in crowds. Not when I wake to find mud from the Yellow River on my kitchen floor, though I live over 100 miles away now. Not when I hear Emma's voice calling my name from the bathroom mirror at precisely 3:17 every morning. Sometimes I find small wooden carvings on my doorstep, crude beginnings of what could become masks. And twice now, I've caught myself staring at blocks of wood in my hands, a carving knife clutched in white-knuckled fingers, with no memory of how either got there. The forest remembers. Walt said that. And it's the only truth I know anymore. It remembers, and it wants me back. Wants me to join Emma and all the others who went into those woods and became something else. I'm moving again tomorrow, changing my name again. But I know it won't matter. You can't escape what lives in Yellow River State Forest. Not when it's already inside you. If you're reading this, stay away from northeastern Iowa. Stay away from the Yellow River and its whispering forests. Stay away from friendly old men in cabins that shouldn't exist. But most of all, if you ever hear someone calling your name from between the trees, don't follow, no matter how familiar the voice sounds, because it isn't them calling. It's just the forest, remembering you. My name is Eleanor Weston. This happened in October 2024. Some nights I still wake up with the taste of dirt in my mouth, my heart hammering against my ribs as if trying to escape. 3 months have passed since the expedition to Yellow River State Forest, but time has become a strange, unreliable thing for me. Like water, it pools in unexpected places, freezes without warning, evaporates when I need it most. I was 34 when I joined the Iowa Department of Natural Resources as a research biologist, specializing in woodland ecosystems. After my divorce from Richard, I needed somewhere new, somewhere the memories wouldn't follow me down every street corner, somewhere I could rebuild. Iowa seemed as good a place as any, affordable, quiet, with enough wilderness to keep me occupied professionally for years. The expedition was meant to be routine, 4 days documenting flora changes in the Paint Creek unit of Yellow River State Forest, collecting samples, and updating our ecological models. Nothing we hadn't done dozens of times before. Our team was small but efficient. Marcus Cooper, my closest colleague and friend since I'd moved to Iowa, Diana Frost, our newest research assistant with a passion for photography, and Nathan Pierce, our team lead, whose rigid adherence to protocols had saved us from countless minor disasters in the field. The morning we departed was crisp, the sky a perfect autumn blue that seemed to promise good fortune. We loaded our gear into the DNR truck, tents, sampling equipment, provisions for 4 days, and enough backup batteries to power a small village. "Everyone got their rain gear?" Nate asked, checking items off his clipboard. "Forecast says clear, but you know how that goes up in the northeast corner." Marcus tossed his duffel into the truck bed. "Yes, Dad," he said with his characteristic grin. At 36, Marcus had the kind of easy charm that made everyone around him feel instantly comfortable. Tall, with perpetually tousled brown hair, he'd been my first real friend in Iowa, showing me the best hiking trails and the one decent coffee shop in our small town. Diana snapped a photo of us loading the truck. "For the department newsletter," she explained, tucking a strand of her short black hair behind her ear. Only 33, Diana had joined our team just 3 months prior. She was eager, perhaps too eager sometimes, but her enthusiasm was refreshing. The drive took just over 3 hours, winding through increasingly remote countryside. As we neared our destination, farmland gave way to dense woodland. The forest looked particularly vibrant that autumn, the maples and oaks displaying a riot of reds and golds that Diana documented enthusiastically through the truck window. "We should be able to set up base camp before noon," Nate said, consulting his GPS. "That'll give us time for initial surveys before dark." Nate was the oldest of our group at 38, with prematurely graying temples and the perpetual expression of someone carrying too many responsibilities. He'd been with the department for over a decade and knew every inch of Iowa's public lands like the back of his hand. Or so we thought. We turned onto a narrow dirt road that would take us to our designated campsite in the Paint Creek unit when Marcus spotted her, an elderly woman walking slowly along the roadside, a gnarled walking stick in one hand and a canvas bag in the other. "Should we offer her a ride?" Diana asked, already rolling down her window. Nate slowed the truck. "Ma'am, are you all right out here?" The woman turned and I felt an immediate irrational chill. She was perhaps in her 70s, with a deeply lined face and eyes so pale they seemed almost colorless. Her gray hair hung in a single thick braid down her back, and despite the cool temperature, she wore only a thin dress beneath a worn cardigan. "I'm right where I'm meant to be," she replied, her voice surprisingly strong. "Question is, are you folks where you ought to be?" "We're with the Department of Natural Resources," Nate explained, showing her his ID badge. "Research team, we're headed to the campground in Paint Creek Unit." The woman's expression darkened. "You planning on going up to the hollow?" We exchanged glances. The hollow wasn't on any of our maps. "We'll be conducting surveys throughout the unit," Nate said diplomatically. She approached the truck then, moving with surprising quickness. "You stay away from the hollow. Nothing good ever comes from disturbing what rests there." "What's in the hollow?" Diana asked, camera already halfway raised. The woman fixed those pale eyes on Diana with such intensity that Diana lowered her camera without taking the shot. "Death," she said simply. "Death that doesn't end with dying." She reached into her canvas bag and pulled out something small and dark, which she pressed into Diana's hand. "If you're fool enough to go there anyway, keep this close." It was a small cloth pouch, crudely sewn and filled with something that smelled of herbs and earth. "I'm Iris Blackwood," the woman continued. "Folks around here call me other names. The Hag of Hollow Trail, mostly." She said this with a hint of pride. "Been warning folks away from the Hollow for 50 years. Few listen." "Thank you for the advice, Ms. Blackwood," Nate said politely but firmly. "We'll keep it in mind." As we drove away, Diana examined the small pouch. "Should I open it?" "Probably just some local superstition," Marcus said, though I noticed he was watching the receding figure of Iris Blackwood in the side mirror. "Every rural area has their local witch." "Let's focus on getting camp set up," Nate said, clearly eager to return to the organized structure of our research plan. We reached our designated campsite shortly before noon, a small clearing near Paint Creek with space for our tents and a fire pit. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, and the burbling of the creek provided a soothing backdrop as we unloaded our gear. As Nate predicted, we had camp established well before dark. Our 3 tents formed a rough triangle around the fire pit, one for Nate, one for Marcus and me as we'd often shared on expeditions, and one for Diana. After a quick lunch, we split into pairs for initial surveys, Nate with Diana heading west along the creek, while Marcus and I took the eastern trail. The afternoon passed uneventfully as we cataloged plant species and collected soil samples. The forest was exceptionally quiet. Even the birds seemed subdued. "Have you heard of the Hollow before?" I asked Marcus as we worked. He shook his head. "Not specifically, but these old forests are full of places with ominous nicknames. Remember Widow's Peak in Backbone State Park? Turned out to be named after a particularly shaped rock formation, not because widows were hurling themselves off it." I laughed, but something about Iris Blackwood's warning lingered uncomfortably in my mind. When we returned to camp, Nate and Diana were already back, comparing notes around the fire. Diana was scrolling through photos on her camera. "Look at this," she said, showing us her display screen. "I caught this weird light effect between the trees." The photo showed a shaft of sunlight between 2 ancient oaks, but something about the light seemed off. Too concentrated, almost solid-looking with strange particle effects that could have been dust, but somehow appeared more deliberate, almost like symbols. "Probably lens flare," Nate suggested. "Maybe," Diana said, but she didn't sound convinced. After dinner, as darkness settled over the forest, we planned our routes for the following day. Nate spread a topographical map across his knees and traced potential survey paths with his finger. "What's this area?" Diana asked, pointing to a section of the map where the contour lines clustered tightly, indicating a steep depression. Nate squinted at the map. "Just a ravine system, probably not worth the difficult terrain." "Could that be the hollow that woman mentioned?" I suggested. Marcus leaned over to examine the map. "Seems likely. Those ravines would create a hollow in the landscape." "It's not on our survey schedule," Nate said firmly. "But if it's an unusual geological feature, it might host unique plant communities," Diana argued. "We should at least document it." After some discussion, Nate reluctantly agreed we could explore the edge of the ravine system the next day, though he insisted we stick together rather than splitting into our usual pairs. That night, I dreamed of Iris Blackwood. In the dream, she was younger, her hair black instead of gray, but those pale eyes were unmistakable. She stood in a clearing similar to the one in Diana's photograph, surrounded by symbols carved into the trees. She was speaking, but I couldn't make out the words. When I awoke just before dawn, the inside of our tent was covered in condensation, despite the dry night. "Did you hear anything last night?" I asked Marcus as we emerged from our tent. "Like what?" "I don't know. Voices, maybe." He gave me a curious look. "No, slept like the dead. Why?" Before I could answer, Diana emerged from her tent, looking exhausted. "Rough night?" Marcus asked. "Couldn't sleep," she admitted. Kept thinking I heard someone walking around the camp." Nate joined us, already fully dressed and checking the weather on his satellite device. "We should get moving soon. Want to cover as much ground as possible before the afternoon. Looks like rain later." We ate a quick breakfast and packed day bags with sampling equipment, water, and emergency supplies. Our plan was to hike to the edge of the ravine system, the hollow, as we'd begun to call it, conduct surveys, and return to camp before dark. The hike took longer than expected. The terrain grew increasingly difficult as we moved deeper into the forest. The underbrush thicker, the trees older and more gnarled. We passed several ancient oaks with trunks so wide it would take 3 people to encircle them, their branches twisting skyward like arthritic fingers. Diana stopped frequently to photograph interesting specimens or striking vistas. During one such stop, she frowned at her camera. "That's odd. Battery's almost dead. I charged it fully last night." "Cold can drain batteries faster," Nate suggested, though the day was mild. I checked my phone to log our coordinates and found it powered down despite having been at 90% when we left camp. When I tried to restart it, the battery icon flashed empty. "Mine too," I said, showing them the dead device. Marcus checked his phone and the GPS unit. Both were dead. Only Nate's satellite device still functioned, though he reported the signal was weaker than it should have been. "Could be magnetic interference from mineral deposits," he said, but he looked troubled. We pressed on, Nate now taking frequent compass readings to maintain our course. The forest had grown eerily quiet. No birdsong, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush, just the sound of our own breathing and footsteps. Around noon, we found the first symbol. Diana spotted it, a complex pattern carved deep into the trunk of a massive oak. It resembled no alphabetic or numeric system I recognized, more like an intricate knot of lines and curves that seemed to shift if you looked at it too long. "This isn't natural," Marcus said, running his fingers over the grooves. "Someone carved this." "Recently?" Nate asked. Marcus shook his head. "No, these cuts are old. The tree's grown around them." He looked up at the canopy. "This tree's been here for centuries." "Look," Diana said quietly. "There are more." She was right. Now that we'd seen the first one, we noticed similar symbols carved into trees throughout the area, all ancient, all positioned at the same height, all facing the same direction, inward toward what must be the hollow. They form a perimeter, I realized, like a boundary line. Nate checked his compass again and frowned. "That can't be right." He tapped the device. "North keeps shifting." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Maybe we should head back. Diana was already pushing forward, camera raised despite its dying battery. "We've come this far." The tree line broke suddenly, revealing what had to be the hollow, a vast depression in the earth, roughly circular and at least 100 yards across. The sides sloped steeply downward, covered in ferns and moss. At the bottom lay a perfectly round pool of water, so dark it appeared black, surrounded by a ring of white stones placed with obvious deliberation. "This isn't on any of the survey maps," Nate said, his voice hushed. "How is that possible?" I asked. "This feature is enormous." Marcus was examining his compass. "Guys, look at this." The needle was spinning wildly, sometimes completing full rotations before pausing, then spinning in the opposite direction. Diana had already started making her way down the slope. "Diana, wait," Nate called. "We don't know if it's stable." She paused, looking back at us. For a moment, I thought I saw something strange in her expression, a blankness that hadn't been there before, but it passed so quickly I decided I'd imagined it. "We should document this," she said. "No one knows it's here." Despite my misgivings, scientific curiosity won out. We carefully made our way down the steep slope, testing each step before committing our weight. The ferns brushed against our legs, leaving damp streaks on our pants. The air grew noticeably colder as we descended. At the bottom, the white stones surrounding the pool were even more striking up close, each one perfectly round and smooth like river stones, but larger than my head. They were arranged in a perfect circle around the water, which was so still it reflected the sky above like a mirror. "Don't touch the water," Marcus said sharply when Diana knelt near the edge. She gave him an odd look. "Why not?" "Just don't. Something's off about this place." He was right. Despite the scientific part of my brain trying to categorize and understand what I was seeing, some deeper, more primitive part was screaming at me to leave. Nate checked his watch. "We've got about 4 hours of daylight left. Let's collect samples and get out of here." As we worked, I couldn't shake the feeling we were being watched. Several times I turned quickly, certain I'd glimpse someone or something at the edge of my vision, but there was never anything there. The silence pressed against my ears like a physical weight. Diana moved methodically around the circle of stones, photographing each one from multiple angles. "The patterns on these are incredible," she said. "Almost like writing, but not quite." I joined her, examining one of the stones. She was right. There were subtle patterns on the surface, like whorls and fingerprints, but more structured. As I traced them with my finger, I felt a strange buzzing sensation, as if the stone was vibrating at a frequency just below perception. "We should leave," I said suddenly. Diana looked up from her camera. "We just got here. Something's wrong with this place, can't you feel it?" Before she could answer, Nate called out from the other side of the pool. "Weather's changing fast. We need to move." The sky, which had been clear blue when we arrived, was now filled with dark clouds. The temperature had dropped noticeably and the wind had picked up, creating ripples across the previously mirror-like surface of the pool. We gathered our equipment quickly and began the climb back up the slope. The ascent was much more difficult than the descent had been. The ground seemed to crumble beneath our feet, the ferns tangling around our ankles as if trying to hold us back. By the time we reached the top, all 4 of us were breathing hard. The first drops of rain began to fall as we started back in the direction of our camp. But something was wrong. The forest looked different, though I couldn't immediately pinpoint how. The trees seemed to be arranged differently, the gaps between them unfamiliar. "This isn't the way we came," Marcus said, voicing my thoughts. Nate pulled out his compass, but the needle continued to spin erratically. He switched to his satellite device, which still functioned but showed our position as being nearly a mile from where we should have been. "That's impossible," he muttered. "We couldn't have gotten that far off course." The rain increased, pattering against the leaves above us. We huddled together, trying to determine our location. "We passed that lightning-struck oak on the way in," Diana said, pointing to a tree whose top half had been sheared away. "So camp should be in that direction." We set off, walking briskly as the rain grew heavier. After 20 minutes, we should have reached our campsite, but there was no sign of the clearing or the creek. "We're going in circles," Marcus said, wiping rain from his face. He was right. The lightning-struck oak stood directly ahead of us, exactly as it had 20 minutes earlier. Nate checked his watch. "That can't be right," he said, tapping the face. "It says it's almost midnight." I checked my own watch, which had been working fine that morning. The hands pointed to 11:47. "Mine too." "But it's still daylight," Diana said, though even as she spoke, I realized the forest had grown significantly darker, far more than could be explained by the cloud cover. We picked up our pace, no longer even pretending to know where we were going, just desperate to find our way out of the increasingly menacing woods. The rain soaked through our clothing and the temperature continued to drop. Darkness fell with unnatural swiftness, as if someone had thrown a switch. One moment we could see well enough to navigate. The next, we were plunged into near-total blackness. We switched on our headlamps, but the beams seemed feeble, illuminating only a few feet ahead. "We need to make camp," Nate said finally. "It's too dangerous to keep moving in these conditions." We found a relatively sheltered spot beneath a cluster of pines and set up our emergency bivouac. A tarp strung between trees to keep off the worst of the rain, emergency blankets wrapped around our shoulders. No one spoke much as we huddled together, each lost in our own thoughts. I must have dozed off despite my anxiety because I jerked awake suddenly, certain I'd heard someone calling my name. The rain had stopped, and a strange silence had fallen over the forest. The others were still asleep. Marcus and Nate leaning against each other, Diana curled on her side a few feet away. Then I heard it again. My name, spoken in a whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Who's there?" I called softly, not wanting to wake the others. No answer, but I felt an overwhelming urge to get up, to move away from our makeshift camp. Almost against my will, I found myself standing, stepping quietly past my sleeping companions. The forest beyond our tarp was transformed. A thick mist had rolled in, swirling around the tree trunks and giving everything a ghostly, insubstantial quality. My headlamp created a halo in the mist, but did little to illuminate the path ahead. I took a few steps, then a few more. The whispering continued, just at the edge of comprehension. Not just my name now, but words, sentences that I couldn't quite make out but felt I needed desperately to hear. A hand grabbed my arm and I nearly screamed before realizing it was Marcus. "What are you doing?" he hissed. You were walking away from camp." I blinked at him, suddenly confused. I heard something, someone calling. His grip on my arm tightened. "There's nothing out there, Ellie. Come back to the tarp." As we turned back, I realized with horror that I had no idea which direction our camp lay. The mist had thickened, obscuring all landmarks. Even our footprints seemed to vanish mere feet behind us. "This way," Marcus said with a confidence I didn't share. We walked for what seemed like hours but was probably only minutes before the tarp finally materialized out of the mist. Nate was awake, looking worried. "Where's Diana?" he asked as soon as he saw us. My stomach dropped. "She wasn't with you?" Nate shook his head. "I woke up and both of you were gone." We called for her, our voices swallowed by the mist. We searched in widening circles from the tarp, never letting it out of our sight for fear of becoming lost ourselves. There was no sign of her. As dawn broke, far too early according to our watches, which still read just past midnight, the mist began to lift. Our surroundings looked nothing like where we had made camp the previous evening. The pines were gone, replaced by ancient oaks similar to those surrounding the hollow. With growing horror, I realized we had somehow returned to the perimeter of that strange depression. "How is this possible?" Nate muttered, checking his satellite device yet again. According to this, we're miles from the hollow. Before either Marcus or I could respond, we heard movement in the underbrush. We turned to see Diana emerging from between the trees, camera in hand, looking perfectly composed despite having been missing for hours. "Diana!" Nate rushed toward her. "Where have you been? We've been searching for hours." She looked confused. "I just went to take some night shots of the forest. I was gone maybe 20 minutes. "You've been missing for over 6 hours, Marcus said. Diana laughed, but the sound was off somehow. A beat too long, a note too high. "That's ridiculous. Look, I got some amazing shots of the mist." She held up her camera, which should have been dead but now appeared to be functioning perfectly. As she scrolled through the images to show us, I caught glimpses of the mist-shrouded forest, but also other scenes that didn't make sense. The pool in the hollow under moonlight, symbols drawn in what looked like ash on smooth stone, and, most disturbingly, a shot of the three of us asleep under the tarp, taken from outside our shelter. "How did you find your way back?" I asked. Diana's smile faltered for a moment. "I just knew the way." As we gathered our limited supplies and tried once more to find our original campsite, I couldn't help noticing subtle differences in Diana's behavior. She walked with a slight hesitation, as if she was conscious of each movement. Her speech patterns had changed, more formal, less of the casual slang she typically used, and several times I caught her staring at me when she thought I wasn't looking, with an expression I couldn't interpret but which raised the hairs on the back of my neck. We walked for hours. According to our watches, which remained frozen at just after midnight despite the bright morning sun, we should have crossed the entire state park several times over. Yet we found neither our campsite nor any trails or roads. Around what felt like midday, Marcus began to lag behind. When I dropped back to walk beside him, I noticed he was sweating profusely despite the cool air. "Are you okay?" I asked. He nodded but wouldn't meet my eyes. "Just tired." "We'll rest soon," I promised, though Nate showed no signs of wanting to stop. "Do you trust her?" Marcus whispered when Diana and Nate were a few paces ahead. "What do you mean?" "Diana. Something happened to her last night." I hesitated. "She does seem different." "She's not Diana anymore," he said with sudden intensity. "I saw her by the pool last night. She was doing something. Something with those stones." Before I could question him further, he jerked suddenly, as if startled by something I couldn't see. His eyes widened, focused on a point just past my shoulder. "Marcus, what is it?" "Don't you see them?" he whispered. "They're everywhere." I turned but saw nothing except trees and undergrowth. When I looked back at Marcus, his expression had gone slack. His pupils so dilated that his eyes appeared almost black. "They're coming out of the trees," he continued, his voice rising. "Coming out of the bark, like they've been inside all along, watching." "There's nothing there," I said, grabbing his shoulders. "Marcus, look at me." His gaze snapped to mine, and for a moment I thought I'd gotten through to him. Then he screamed, a sound of pure terror that echoed through the silent forest. He tore away from me and ran, crashing through the underbrush. "Marcus!" I called, starting after him. Nate caught my arm. "Let me. You stay with Diana." The last thing I wanted was to be alone with Diana, but I nodded. Nate took off after Marcus while Diana and I waited in a small clearing. "He's seeing them too," Diana said after a moment of silence. I looked at her sharply. "Seeing what?" Her smile was all wrong, too wide, showing too many teeth. "The ones who live in the hollow, the ones who've always been here." I took a step back. "What happened to you last night?" "I found truth," she said simply. "I found purpose. This isn't you talking, isn't it?" She cocked her head. "Maybe this is who I've always been, underneath the person you thought you knew." I was saved from having to respond by Nate's return. He was alone, his face grim. "I lost him," he admitted. "He's moving too fast, not following any path. It's like he's running from something." "We need to find him," I said. "He's not well." "He's exactly where he needs to be," Diana murmured. Nate gave her a strange look but said nothing. We spent the next several hours searching for Marcus, calling his name until our voices grew hoarse. The forest seemed to deliberately confound us, paths appearing and then vanishing, landmarks shifting when we weren't looking directly at them. As daylight began to fade, far too quickly for normal October, we were forced to admit defeat. We found another sheltered spot and made camp again, this time with Nate explicitly stating we would take turns keeping watch. "I'll take first shift," he said. "Ellie, I'll wake you in 4 hours." I nodded, though I doubted I would sleep. Diana curled up on the far side of the tarp, her back to us. Within minutes, her breathing had settled into the rhythm of sleep, or a convincing imitation of it. "What do you think happened to her?" I whispered to Nate. He shook his head. "I don't know. But we're getting out of here first thing tomorrow, with or without Marcus." He hesitated. "Have you noticed how the forest seems to respond to her? Like it's letting her lead us somewhere?" I had noticed. Whenever we reached what seemed like an impassable thicket, Diana would pause, tilt her head as if listening, then find a path none of us had seen. It was subtle enough that I'd thought I was imagining it, but hearing Nate voice the same observation sent chills down my spine. Despite my certainty that I wouldn't sleep, exhaustion eventually claimed me. I dreamed of Iris Blackwood again, but this time she was in the hollow, standing beside the dark pool. "I tried to warn you," she was saying. "Now she's inside." I awoke with a jolt to find the sky lightening again, though my watch still read 12:03 a.m. Nate was slumped against a tree, eyes closed. I crawled over to him. "Nate? Why didn't you wake me for my shift?" He didn't respond. I shook his shoulder gently, then more firmly. When he finally slumped sideways, I saw the back of his head, or what was left of it. The skull had been crushed, his hair matted with dried blood and fragments of bone. I recoiled so violently I knocked over our water bottles. Nate had been murdered in the night, while I slept mere feet away. Diana was gone. My first instinct was to run, to put as much distance between myself and this nightmare as possible. But I couldn't leave Nate like that. Couldn't abandon Marcus, who was still out there somewhere. With trembling hands, I covered Nate's body with one of the emergency blankets. I had no way to dig a grave, no tools or time. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'll come back for you. I promise." I gathered what supplies I could carry and set off. No destination in mind except away from that clearing and the horror it contained. The forest felt different now, actively malevolent rather than merely disorienting. Branches seemed to reach for me as I passed, roots rose from the ground to trip my feet, and that awful silence pressed in from all sides. I found myself moving downhill, following what appeared to be a game trail. The vegetation grew thicker, more lush, as if nourished by something beyond normal rainfall. After an hour of hiking, I heard water, the unmistakable sound of a stream or small river. I broke through the underbrush onto the banks of what had to be Paint Creek. Relief flooded through me. If I followed the creek, it would eventually lead me to a road or campsite. Water always led to civilization. I had gone perhaps half a mile when I spotted something on the opposite bank that made me freeze. A flash of blue that matched the shirt Marcus had been wearing. I crossed at a shallow point, my boots filling with icy water, and climbed the far bank. Marcus sat with his back against a tree, knees drawn up to his chest, staring at nothing. He didn't acknowledge me as I approached. "Marcus, it's Ellie." No response. I knelt beside him and touched his arm gently. He flinched but finally looked at me. His eyes were bloodshot, his face streaked with dirt and scratches. "They're in the trees," he whispered. "They've always been in the trees. Marcus, Nate is dead. Someone killed him. We need to get out of here." A flicker of comprehension crossed his face. Diana's missing too." He laughed, a brittle sound on the edge of hysteria. "Not missing, changed, taken, like the others before." "What others? Marcus, you're not making sense." "Iris Blackwood," he said, his voice suddenly clearer. "She warned us. She's been warning people for decades, and when they don't listen..." He trailed off, his gaze drifting past me. I turned to see what had caught his attention and saw Diana standing at the edge of the trees, watching us. She looked different, her posture straighter, her face somehow sharper. The pouch Iris had given her hung around her neck on a cord I hadn't seen before. "You found him," she said, her voice carrying easily across the distance. "Good." "Stay away from us," I warned, standing and positioning myself between her and Marcus. Diana, or whatever was wearing Diana's face, smiled. "You don't understand yet, do you? You can't leave. None of you can leave." "What did you do to Nate?" She shrugged, the gesture too fluid, like someone mimicking human movement without quite getting it right. "He was going to separate us. I couldn't allow that." "What are you?" "I am Iris Blackwood. I am the Hag of Hollow Trail. I am the keeper of the Hollow." She took a step forward. "And soon I will be you as well, Eleanor Weston." Beside me, Marcus whimpered. I reached down without taking my eyes off Diana and pulled him to his feet. "Run," I whispered. We fled upstream, splashing through shallow sections of the creek, scrambling over rocks and fallen trees. Behind us, I could hear Diana following, not running, just walking steadily as if she knew we couldn't escape. The creek curved sharply, and as we rounded the bend, I saw what looked like a trail leading up the bank and away from the water. Without hesitation, I dragged Marcus toward it, desperate for any escape from the thing that pursued us. The trail was overgrown but clearly man-made, switchbacking up the steep embankment. Marcus stumbled beside me, his breathing ragged, but he kept moving. When we reached the top, I risked a glance back. Diana stood at the creek's edge, watching us with those unnaturally pale eyes. Iris Blackwood's eyes. "She won't cross running water," Marcus gasped. "Not easily. It buys us time." I wanted to ask how he knew that, but there wasn't time. We pushed forward, the trail widening into what was clearly an old service road now reclaimed by nature. "We need to find a way out of this forest," I said, supporting Marcus as he stumbled again. "There is no way out," he replied, "not while she's hunting us." "What is she? What happened to Diana?" Marcus shook his head. "Iris Blackwood died decades ago. Hanged herself by the hollow after her entire family disappeared. But something remained. Something that can wear people like clothing. How do you know this?" His eyes were unfocused, distant. "The trees told me. They've seen it all. They remember." I didn't have time to process his apparent delusions because the road curved and suddenly opened onto a small clearing containing a cabin. It was ancient, the logs weathered to silver, the roof partially collapsed, but it was undeniably human-made, a sign of civilization. "We can't stay here," Marcus said, trying to pull away from me. "It's hers. It's always been hers." But we had nowhere else to go, and night was falling again. That unnatural, swift darkness descending like a curtain. I dragged Marcus toward the cabin. The door hung crookedly on rusted hinges, opening with a groan that seemed to echo through the empty forest. Inside was a single room, dusty and cobwebbed but surprisingly intact. A stone fireplace dominated one wall. A narrow bed frame without a mattress stood against another. A rough wooden table with a single chair completed the sparse furnishings. Most disturbing were the symbols carved into every surface. The walls, the floor, the ceiling beams, the same intricate patterns we'd seen on the trees surrounding the hollow. "This was her home," Marcus whispered. "Iris Blackwood's, before the hollow took her family." I barricaded the door with the table, though I doubted it would keep out whatever was hunting us. Marcus collapsed onto the floor in the corner farthest from the door, drawing his knees to his chest like a frightened child. "We need to build a fire," I said, desperate for light, for warmth, for any semblance of normality. There was wood stacked beside the fireplace, ancient and dry but seemingly usable. I got a small fire going, using the last of my waterproof matches. The flames cast grotesque shadows that made the symbols on the walls seem to writhe and move. "We can't stay here," Marcus repeated, rocking slightly. "She'll find us." "We'll leave at first light," I promised, though I had no idea which direction would lead us to safety. "Try to rest now." He laughed again, that same brittle sound. "There is no first light, haven't you noticed? Time isn't working right. Our watches stopped at midnight. That's when the hollow opens. That's when she can walk freely." I checked my watch again, still 12:03 a.m. despite the hours that had passed. What does she want? To spread, to fill more vessels. She's been alone for so long, trapped in the hollow, able to maintain only one human form at a time. But the boundaries are weakening. She wants to be Legion. His words sent chills down my spine. But before I could question him further, a sound from outside made us both freeze. Footsteps on the path, unhurried, deliberate. Marcus scrambled to his feet. "The back wall," he hissed. "There's another way out. There has to be." We felt along the rough logs of the rear wall, searching for any sign of a hidden exit. The footsteps grew closer, now on the porch. The table barricading the door began to shake, though no force was visibly applied to it. My fingers found a seam in the wall, a section where the logs didn't quite meet. I pushed, and to my amazement, a narrow door swung inward, revealing steps descending into darkness. "Go," I urged Marcus. "Quickly." We squeezed through the opening just as the front door burst open, the table flying across the room as if thrown by invisible hands. I pulled the hidden door closed behind us, plunging us into absolute darkness. The steps were narrow and steep, carved directly into the earth. I counted 18 before the passage leveled out, the ceiling so low we had to crouch. The air was damp and heavy with the smell of earth and decay. "Where does this lead?" I whispered. "Down," Marcus replied simply. "Always down." We shuffled forward in the darkness, one hand on the wall for guidance. The passage twisted and turned, sometimes widening enough that we could walk upright, sometimes narrowing so much that we had to turn sideways to squeeze through. I lost all sense of time and direction. We could have been walking for minutes or hours, heading toward safety or deeper into danger. The only constant was the steady decline. We were descending, always descending. Finally, the passage opened into a larger space. Without light, I couldn't determine its dimensions, but the echo of our breathing suggested a substantial cavern. The air felt different here, less stagnant, with a faint current that brought unfamiliar scents. "We need light," I said, my voice sounding small in the vast darkness. To my surprise, light appeared, a soft blue-white glow that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. As our eyes adjusted, I saw that the entire cavern was lined with a bioluminescent fungus, giving everything an eerie, underwater quality. The space was roughly circular, perhaps 50 feet across, with a ceiling that soared above us. The walls were not natural but carved, covered in the same symbols we'd seen in the forest and the cabin, but here they were more elaborate, more numerous, overlapping and flowing into each other in a dizzying pattern. At the center of the cavern lay a pool, identical to the one in the hollow, down to the ring of white stones surrounding it. But while that pool had been dark, this one glowed with the same blue-white light as the fungus, pulsing gently as if alive. "It's the same place," Marcus said, his voice filled with wonder. "The hollow above and the hollow below, reflections of each other. That's not possible." We had walked for what felt like miles. Possible doesn't apply here. He approached the pool, seeming more lucid than he had been since our separation in the forest. "This is older than the forest, older than anything human, a thin place where boundaries between worlds grow weak." I stayed back, unwilling to approach that glowing water. "We need to find a way out, Marcus. There has to be another passage." He nodded absently, circling the pool. "There's always a way out. And a way in. That's how she moves between." A sound from the passage we'd traversed made me whirl around. Footsteps coming closer. Diana had found us. "Marcus, we need to move. Now." He ignored me, kneeling beside the pool, his fingers tracing the patterns on one of the white stones. "I understand now," he murmured. "I can stop her." The footsteps grew louder. I frantically searched the cavern walls for another exit but found nothing except the endless carved symbols. "Marcus, please." He looked up at me, his eyes clear for the first time in days. "There's only one way to seal the hollow, Ellie. A life freely given." That's what Iris Blackwood tried to do when she hanged herself. But it wasn't enough because it wasn't freely given. It was taken out of despair. "What are you talking about?" "Diana is only partially taken. There's still enough of her left that Iris, the thing that was Iris, needs to consolidate its hold. That's why it's hunting us instead of simply disappearing into the forest with its new vessel. It needs more vessels to fully manifest in our world." The footsteps had reached the cavern entrance. Diana stood silhouetted against the darker passage, her form somehow distorted, as if multiple shadows overlapped and diverged around her. "You can't hide from me," she said, but her voice was different now, layered, as if multiple people spoke in unison. "I've waited too long for this moment." Marcus stood, positioning himself between Diana and the pool. "You can't cross the water, Iris. Not in that form. Not yet." Diana, or the thing wearing Diana's face, smiled. "Then I'll wear yours instead." She lunged forward with inhuman speed, but Marcus was ready. As her fingers reached for him, he stepped aside and, in one fluid motion, shoved her toward the pool. She stumbled, arms windmilling, but caught herself at the very edge. For a moment, she teetered there, her face contorted with rage and fear. Then Marcus did something I will never forget. He wrapped his arms around her and, with a look of perfect serenity, pulled them both into the glowing water. There was no splash, no sound at all. They simply vanished beneath the luminescent surface as if it were a portal rather than water. The pool flared blindingly bright for a moment, then began to darken, the glow fading like a light being slowly dimmed. I stood frozen, unable to process what I had just witnessed. My best friend and my colleague were gone, swallowed by whatever supernatural force dwelled in that pool. As the light from the pool dimmed, the fungus on the walls also began to fade. I was about to be left in total darkness, trapped in this underground cavern with no way out. Desperation drove me to action. I circled the cavern one more time, feeling every inch of the wall for any sign of an exit. My fingers found a seam, similar to the hidden door in the cabin but vertical, reaching from floor to ceiling. I pushed against it with all my strength and slowly, reluctantly, it began to move. Fresh air rushed in, carrying the scent of pine and earth. I squeezed through the opening to find myself standing on the bank of Paint Creek, less than 100 yards from our original campsite. Our tents still stood, untouched. Our equipment remained exactly as we had left it. Days or hours ago, I could no longer tell. The sun was just rising, casting long shadows through the trees. My watch, when I checked it, showed 6:17 a.m. Time had resumed its normal flow. I gathered only what I could carry, leaving the rest behind. I couldn't bear to touch Diana's belongings or Marcus's tent. I started walking, following the creek downstream, and within 2 hours reached a road where a passing park ranger stopped to offer me a ride. I told the authorities that my colleagues had gone missing in the forest. Search parties were organized. Dogs were brought in. Helicopters scanned from above. No trace of Nate, Marcus, or Diana was ever found. Eventually, the search was called off, their disappearances filed away as another tragic wilderness accident. I quit my job at the DNR. I couldn't bear to remain in Iowa, surrounded by forests that now seemed full of watching eyes. I moved to Arizona, where the desert's stark openness offers nowhere for secrets to hide. But sometimes, in my dreams, I return to the hollow. I see Marcus and Diana, their faces serene, walking among the ancient trees. I see symbols carved into bark, into stone, into flesh. And sometimes, when I look in the mirror after waking from these dreams, I catch a glimpse of something in my eyes, something pale and ancient that doesn't belong there. I keep the small cloth pouch Iris Blackwood gave Diana. I found it on the bank of the creek when I emerged from the cavern, as if it had been deliberately placed there for me to find. I don't open it. I don't need to know what's inside. I simply keep it close, especially when the air grows still and the shadows seem to lengthen of their own accord. Because sometimes, late at night, I hear whispering, my name, spoken in voices that sound like rustling leaves and flowing water, and I wonder if the hollow is still calling, still hungry, still waiting for me to return. I wonder if part of me was left behind in those woods, or if something from those woods now resides within me, patient and watchful, biding its time. My name is Eleanor Weston, and this happened in October 2024. 3 months have passed, but sometimes I think time, like everything else in Yellow River State Forest, is not what it appears to be. Sometimes I think it's still midnight in the hollow and always will be. My name is Evelyn Cooper. This happened in October 2024. I still remember the smell first, earthy decay mingled with something metallic and wrong. The forest had seemed so alive that morning. but as dusk settled over Yellow River State Forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us from between the trees. My camera hung unused around my neck. No amount of stunning autumn foliage could distract me from the dread that had been building since we found that cabin. "Evelyn, come look at this view," Marcus called from ahead on the trail. His voice echoed strangely in the dense woods of northeastern Iowa, bouncing back as if the forest itself was mocking him. I should never have agreed to this trip. 3 days of reconnecting with my ex in the remote Paint Creek unit of Yellow River sounded like the setup for a bad romantic comedy. Now, it felt like the beginning of something much darker. Sadie, my German Shepherd mix, pressed against my leg, her ears alert. She'd been on edge all day, refusing to stray more than a few feet from me. That alone should have been my first serious warning. "We should head back to camp," I called to Marcus. "It'll be dark soon." He turned, his silhouette sharp against the fading light filtering through the trees. "Always playing it safe, Ev. That's why we never worked out." His words stung more than they should have. Our 3-year relationship had dissolved 6 months ago when I caught him texting his coworker at 2 a.m. He'd claimed they were just friends, but the messages suggested otherwise. Yet, somehow, he'd convinced me that this trip would give us closure, whatever that meant. As we made our way back to our campsite, Marcus walked ahead confidently while I trailed behind with Sadie. The October air was growing colder, and the wind whispered through the trees with an almost human quality. Yellow River State Forest was beautiful during the day, with its limestone bluffs and panoramic views of the Mississippi River Valley, but at night the dense woodlands transformed into something primeval and foreboding. "Did you hear that?" I asked, stopping suddenly. Marcus paused. "Hear what?" "Like someone calling my name." He rolled his eyes. "It's just the wind, Ev. Christ, you're jumpy." Maybe he was right. Maybe the isolation was getting to me. We'd barely seen another soul since arriving yesterday, hiking deep into the Paint Creek unit where the trails grew wild and less maintained. Marcus had insisted on veering off the marked paths, claiming he wanted to photograph untouched nature for his Instagram. As a wildlife photographer by profession, I should have been excited by the pristine landscape, but something about these woods felt off. It was almost fully dark by the time we reached our campsite. I immediately noticed something was wrong. "Marcus," I whispered, grabbing his arm. "Our tent." The rainfly was partially undone, and our backpacks, which we'd left inside, were now arranged neatly outside the entrance. Marcus frowned. "Did you do this before we left?" I shook my head slowly. Sadie began to growl, the fur on her back standing up. She faced the darkest part of the forest, her body rigid. "Hello?" Marcus called out. "Anyone there?" Nothing but the rustling of leaves answered him. "Maybe it was animals," he suggested, though he didn't sound convinced. I kneeled to check our backpacks, my hands trembling slightly. "Everything's still here. Nothing's missing." That was almost more unsettling than if our belongings had been stolen. Who would go through our things and not take anything? As Marcus rebuilt our campfire, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being observed. The forest around us seemed alive with soft movements and whispers just below the threshold of hearing. Sadie refused to settle, pacing the perimeter of our campsite with anxious energy. "We should have stayed at the Eagle's Landing campground with other people," I said, huddling closer to the fire. "I told you this was too remote." Marcus looked irritated as he poked at the flames. What happened to the adventurous Evelyn I used to know? The woman who would hike for days to get the perfect shot of a rare bird? "She grew up and learned that taking unnecessary risks is stupid," I snapped. He was silent for a moment. "Look, I think I saw a cabin about a mile back. If you're really that freaked out, we could try to find it tomorrow. See if there's a ranger or someone who can help us get our bearings." I nodded, though something about his mention of a cabin sent an uncomfortable shiver down my spine. I hadn't seen any cabins on our hike, and I was certain we were deep within the state forest boundaries, where private residences shouldn't exist. That night, I slept fitfully, plagued by dreams of being chased through an endless forest by creatures that moved on all fours but weren't quite animals. They called my name in voices that sounded almost human. Sadie spent the night pressed against me, occasionally growling at noises outside our tent. I woke at dawn to find Marcus already up, making coffee over a small fire. He looked unusually cheerful. "Sleep well?" he asked, handing me a steaming cup. "Not really." I stretched, wincing at the stiffness in my back. "You?" "Like a baby," he grinned. Something about his smile seemed off. It didn't quite reach his eyes. As I sipped the bitter coffee, I pulled out our trail map and GPS. We were supposed to hike to Heffern's Point today, a scenic overlook that would give me a chance to photograph the Mississippi Valley. "That's weird," I muttered, turning the GPS over in my hand. The screen showed nothing but static. "What's wrong?" Marcus leaned over my shoulder, his breath warm on my neck. "GPS isn't working. And this map—" I frowned, studying the paper map that had been perfectly clear yesterday. The trail markings seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them, rearranging themselves into patterns that made no sense. "Maybe we should find that cabin I mentioned," Marcus suggested again. "They might have a better map." I looked at him skeptically. "You really saw a cabin out here, in the middle of a state forest?" He nodded. "About a mile east of here. Looked well maintained, too, like someone lives there year-round." Against my better judgment, I agreed. After packing up our campsite, we headed in the direction Marcus indicated, with Sadie leading the way. The morning was misty, the sun struggling to break through the dense canopy above. The trees seemed taller and older here, their gnarled branches reaching toward each other like desperate hands. After about 40 minutes of hiking, Marcus stopped suddenly. There it is. Through the trees stood a cabin that looked like it had grown organically from the forest floor. Built of dark timber with a stone foundation, it had a small front porch and chimney that released a steady stream of smoke. What struck me as odd was the lack of any clearing around it. The trees came right up to the walls as if embracing the structure. "Hello?" Marcus called out, approaching the cabin confidently. "Anyone home?" The door creaked open before he reached it, revealing a man in his 60s with a weathered face and piercing blue eyes. He wore faded overalls and a flannel shirt, looking every bit the woodland dweller. "Well now," the man said, his voice surprisingly melodic. "Don't get many visitors out this way. Walter Holloway?" He extended a calloused hand which Marcus shook enthusiastically. "Marcus Williams," my ex replied, "and this is Evelyn Cooper and her dog Sadie. We're a bit turned around. Our GPS isn't working, and the trails don't match our map." Walter's eyes flickered to me, then to Sadie, who stood rigid beside me, her hackles raised. She emitted a low, continuous growl. "Sadie, hush," I commanded, but she wouldn't stop. Walter smiled thinly. "Dogs don't much care for me. Never have." He turned back to Marcus. "Why don't you come inside? Martha just made some stew, and our children are visiting. They know these woods better than anyone. Could help you get your bearings." Every instinct I had screamed danger, but Marcus was already following Walter inside. I hesitated on the porch, one hand on Sadie's collar. Through the open door, I could see a rustic interior lit by oil lamps. A woman stood by an old cast-iron stove, and 3 younger adults, 2 men and a woman who looked remarkably similar to each other, sat at a wooden table. "Come in, dear," the woman by the stove called. "You must be cold." I wasn't cold at all. In fact, the October day was unusually warm, but I found myself stepping over the threshold despite my reservations. Sadie resisted, planting her feet and whining desperately. "Your dog can stay outside," Walter suggested, his tone leaving no room for argument. "She goes where I go," I insisted, surprising myself with my firmness. Walter and I locked eyes for a moment, and I swear his pupils elongated slightly before returning to normal. "As you wish," he conceded. The cabin's interior smelled of herbs and meat cooking, but underneath was that same metallic scent I'd noticed in the forest the previous evening. The 3 adult children at the table stared at us with identical expressions of polite interest. They looked to be in their 30s, with the same blue eyes as Walter and the same dark hair as Martha. "These are our children," Martha said, noticing my stare. "Thomas, Samuel, and Rebecca. They're triplets." They nodded in unison, which sent another chill down my spine. I'd never seen triplets who looked quite so identical. "Remarkable resemblance," I commented, trying to keep my voice steady. "We get that a lot," they replied in perfect synchronization. Marcus seemed completely at ease, accepting a bowl of stew from Martha and sitting at the table with the triplets. I remained standing, keeping Sadie close to my side. She wouldn't stop trembling. "So, how long have you lived out here?" Marcus asked between spoonfuls of stew. "I thought this was all state forest land." Walter sat at the head of the table, folding his hands. "Our family's been here since before this was a state forest. Got a special arrangement with the government. We keep to ourselves, they leave us be." That sounded highly unlikely, but I wasn't about to challenge him in his own home. "You said you needed help with directions?" Walter continued. "Where are you trying to get to?" "Heffern's Point," I said before Marcus could answer. "We're photographers." Walter exchanged a look with Martha. "That's a fair distance from here. Easy to get lost if you don't know the way. Samuel can guide you there tomorrow. Tonight you should stay here. It gets dangerous in these woods after dark." "Oh, we couldn't impose," I began. "We insist," Martha interrupted. "We have a guest room. Been ages since we've had company." Before I could protest further, Marcus accepted their offer. "That's incredibly kind of you. Thank you." I shot him a furious look, which he ignored. Something was very wrong here, but Marcus either couldn't see it or was choosing not to. Throughout dinner, I barely touched my stew, despite Martha's urging. The triplets spoke little, mostly answering direct questions from Marcus about the area. They moved in unsettling unison, as if sharing one mind between 3 bodies. After the meal, Walter suggested that Marcus join him and Samuel for a nightcap in what he called the back room. When I tried to follow, Martha gently but firmly steered me toward the guest room. "Men's talk," she said with a knowing smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Rebecca will show you where you'll sleep." Rebecca led me up a narrow staircase to a small bedroom with a single double bed. The walls were bare except for strange symbols carved directly into the wood, intricate swirls and angular patterns that made my eyes hurt if I looked at them too long. "What are these markings?" I asked. "Protection," Rebecca answered, her voice oddly flat. "Sleep well, Evelyn Cooper." The way she said my full name sent ice through my veins. I hadn't introduced myself with my last name. After she left, I tried the door and found it wouldn't lock. I pushed the room's single chair against the doorknob as a makeshift barricade and sat on the bed with Sadie, who hadn't stopped shaking. "It's okay, girl," I whispered, though I knew it wasn't. "We'll leave first thing in the morning." I pulled out my phone, unsurprised to find no signal. The time displayed was 10:37 p.m., but my watch, an old-fashioned analog one that had belonged to my father, showed 2:13 a.m. Somehow, hours had passed in what felt like minutes. Sleep was out of the question. I sat alert, listening to the strange noises that emanated from somewhere below, rhythmic thumping, occasional chanting in a language I couldn't identify, and once, a cry that might have been pain or ecstasy. Around what my watch showed as 3:30 a.m., the door handle turned. Sadie instantly went rigid, a growl building in her throat. The chair held against the first push, but with the second, it gave way, and Walter stood in the doorway. "Can't sleep?" he asked casually, as if it were perfectly normal to force his way into a guest's room in the middle of the night. "Where's Marcus?" I demanded, standing up. "Resting. The moonshine hit some folks hard." Walter leaned against the doorframe, blocking my exit. "You don't trust us, do you, Evelyn?" "I don't know you," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. He smiled, showing teeth that seemed too numerous and sharp. "Oh, but we want to know you. It's been so long since we've had new blood in these parts." Sadie's growl turned into a snarl, and she positioned herself between Walter and me. Walter's eyes narrowed at the dog. "That animal is troublesome. Should have left it outside where it belongs." "I think we should leave," I said, reaching for my backpack. "Right now. Where's Marcus?" Walter stepped further into the room. "You misunderstand, Evelyn. No one leaves until we're finished. We have a process." The way he said "process" made my skin crawl. I'd been right from the beginning. These people were dangerous. But what exactly did they want? "Stay back," I warned, pulling out my hunting knife from my pack. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. Walter laughed, a sound like dry leaves scraping across stone. "You think that will help you? We've been taking hikers in these woods for generations. The forest provides, and I'll adapt." As he spoke, his face seemed to ripple, like heat waves over asphalt. For just a moment, his features became fluid, rearranging themselves into something that resembled Marcus. Then he was Walter again, smiling that too wide smile. "What are you?" I whispered, horror flooding through me. "The old tribes called us skinwalkers," he said matter-of-factly. "We prefer adapters. We take what we need to survive another season." He gestured to the symbols on the walls. "The binding is almost complete. Soon, one of us will wear your skin, know your memories, walk out of these woods as Evelyn Cooper." A scream built in my throat but died when I heard heavy footsteps on the stairs. Martha appeared behind Walter alongside the three triplets, and with them was Marcus. Except it wasn't Marcus. Not really. He had Marcus's face, his build, his clothes, but his movements were wrong. Too fluid, almost boneless. And his eyes were Walter's eyes now, that piercing blue. "Evelyn," he said, but his voice had harmonics that Marcus's never did. "It's me. Everything's fine now." Sadie lunged at him, barking furiously. The Marcus thing hissed, its face contorting momentarily into something reptilian before settling back into a poor approximation of my ex's features. "The dog knows," Walter sighed. "They always know. That's why we needed to separate you from it." I feinted with the knife, then dove past them, pulling Sadie with me. We thundered down the stairs, knocking Rebecca aside as she tried to block our path. Outside, the night was impossibly dark, the moon and stars blotted out by thick clouds that hadn't been there earlier. "Which way?" I gasped, disoriented by the perfect darkness. Our campsite could be in any direction, and in this blackness I couldn't see any landmarks. Behind us, the cabin door flew open, spilling yellow lamplight onto the porch. The Holloways, all of them, including the thing wearing Marcus's face, emerged. "Run, Evelyn Cooper," Walter called. "It makes the binding stronger when there's fear in the blood." I sprinted into the forest, Sadie at my heels. Branches whipped my face and arms, but I didn't slow down. I could hear them behind me, moving with inhuman speed through the underbrush, calling my name in a chorus of distorted voices. Time became meaningless as I ran. My watch showed hours passing in minutes, then minutes stretching into hours. The forest itself seemed to shift around me, paths appearing and disappearing, trees moving when I wasn't looking directly at them. Eventually, I stumbled into a small clearing and collapsed, lungs burning. Sadie stood guard, growling at every sound from the darkness. I pulled out my useless phone, using its faint light to examine my surroundings. Carved into every tree around the clearing was the same symbol I'd seen in the cabin bedroom. I was in another trap. A twig snapped and Marcus stepped into the clearing, the real Marcus, looking confused and disheveled. "Ev," he whispered, "what's happening? I woke up in the woods. I don't remember anything after dinner." Sadie's reaction told me everything I needed to know. She bounded toward him, tail wagging, pressing her nose into his hand. This was the real Marcus. "They drugged you," I said, pulling him down beside me. "We need to get out of here. Those people, they're not human." What are you talking about? Walter and his family? They're skinwalkers, Marcus. They can take people's forms somehow. There's one that looks exactly like you back at the cabin." He looked at me like I'd lost my mind, but before he could argue, we heard it, a perfect imitation of my voice calling his name from the darkness. "Marcus, help me. I'm hurt." His face drained of color. "What the fuck is that?" "We need to move. Now." I pulled him to his feet. We ran again, but this time with purpose. I had a compass in my pack, and though the needle spun wildly when pointed in most directions, it remained steady when aimed southeast. That had to be away from the Holloway's influence. Dawn was breaking when we finally stumbled upon a marked trail. My watch, which had been behaving erratically all night, suddenly synced with my phone. 6:47 a.m. We'd been running for nearly 4 hours. There, Marcus pointed ahead to a wooden sign. Yellow River State Forest, Big Paint Creek Campground, 1.2 miles. As we followed the trail, the forest around us gradually felt more normal. Birds began to sing, and the oppressive feeling of being watched faded. We reached the campground just as a park ranger was starting his morning rounds. He looked surprised to see us emerge from the trail, battered and exhausted. "Are you folks all right?" he asked, approaching cautiously. "We got lost," I explained, not willing to share the full story. "Spent the night in the woods." The ranger, whose name tag read Johnson, offered us water from his truck. "Where were you camping? The backcountry sites?" "Near Paint Creek, off-trail," Marcus admitted. Ranger Johnson frowned. "That's restricted area. There's been some incidents up there, missing hikers." My blood ran cold. "What kind of incidents?" He hesitated. "Nothing confirmed, but every few years, hikers go missing in that northeast section. Some turn up later with no memory of where they've been. Others don't turn up at all." "Have you heard of a family living out there?" I asked. "The Holloways." The ranger's face changed, becoming guarded. "Where did you hear that name?" "We met them," Marcus said. "They gave us shelter." Ranger Johnson was silent for a long moment. "There's no family living in the state forest. That's impossible. But—" He lowered his voice. "My grandfather used to talk about the Holloways. Said they were old, even when he was a boy, living in the same cabin deep in the woods. Said they'd invite travelers in, and sometimes those travelers would come back changed." "Changed how?" I prompted. "Little things at first. Different mannerisms, forgetting names of loved ones. Then bigger things. New skills they never had before, speaking languages they never learned. Eventually, they'd just disappear. Leave town without saying goodbye to anyone." A chill ran down my spine despite the morning sun. "And no one investigated?" Ranger Johnson shrugged. "It's just local legend. No one's actually confirmed a family living out there. We do sweeps of the forest regularly. Never found any cabin. But I knew what I'd seen, what I'd experienced. The Holloways were real, and they were still out there, waiting for the next lost hikers to stumble upon their cabin." The ranger drove us to the main parking area where we'd left our car 2 days earlier. As Marcus loaded our gear into the trunk, I noticed something tucked under the windshield wiper. A small piece of paper folded in half. Inside was a crude drawing of 5 figures holding hands around a smaller figure. On the back, written in spidery handwriting, "Until next time, Evelyn Cooper." I burned the note at the first gas station we stopped at, watching the paper curl and blacken in the flame of my lighter. Marcus thought I was overreacting, that the trauma of getting lost had caused me to hallucinate the worst of it. Eventually, I stopped trying to convince him. 3 weeks after our return, Marcus came to my apartment unannounced. Something about him seemed off from the moment I opened the door. His movements were too fluid, his smile too wide. Sadie, who had always adored him, cowered behind my legs, growling. "Aren't you going to invite me in, Ev?" he asked, his voice carrying those strange harmonics I'd heard in the forest. I slammed the door in his face and called the police, but by the time they arrived, he was gone. I filed a report, but what could I say? That my ex-boyfriend had been replaced by a creature that could steal human forms? The official investigation revealed that Marcus had missed work for 3 days prior to showing up at my door. His apartment showed signs of a struggle, with strange symbols carved into the walls. The same symbols I'd seen in the Holloway cabin. I've moved 3 times since then, but I still catch glimpses of figures watching me from crowded streets or forest edges. Faces that ripple and change when I look directly at them. Faces that sometimes look like Marcus or Walter or the triplets. I don't hike anymore. I don't camp. I barely even walk in city parks, because I know they're still out there. The Holloways, wearing the skins of those they've taken, learning to be human, spreading further from their forest home, and I know someday they'll find me again. Until then, I keep Sadie close, because animals always know. They always know what's wearing a human face. My name is Daniel Winters. I'm 34 years old. This happened in October of 2023. We're lost, aren't we? Morgan's voice came from the back seat, tinged with that familiar edge of accusation. I glanced at the GPS on my phone, which had been glitching for the past hour, showing our little blue dot jumping erratically across the screen. 1 minute we were on the road to Yellow River State Forest, the next we were supposedly in the middle of nowhere. We're not lost, I insisted, gripping the steering wheel tighter. Just temporarily misplaced. Sarah, my wife of 8 years, gave me that look I'd grown to recognize, half exasperated, half amused. Really, Dan? Temporarily misplaced? We haven't seen another car in 40 minutes. She wasn't wrong. The narrow county road had grown progressively more isolated since we'd turned off Highway 76. The dense autumn foliage of northeastern Iowa pressed in close on both sides, creating a tunnel of red and gold that would have been beautiful if it wasn't starting to feel suffocating. Morgan sighed dramatically from the back seat. At 15, our daughter had perfected the art of conveying maximum disapproval with minimal effort. I told you we should have gone to the mall in Dubuque instead. But no, we had to do family bonding in nature. She made air quotes with her fingers, not looking up from her phone. There's no signal out here anyway, she added, waving her device. What am I supposed to do for 3 days without Wi-Fi? Talk to your parents, I suggested. Read a book? Enjoy the great outdoors? She rolled her eyes, slouching further into her seat. Next to her, 12-year-old Ethan remained unusually quiet, his face pressed against the window glass, watching the trees rush by. What do you think, buddy? I asked, trying to engage my son. Ready for some camping? Ethan turned slowly toward me, his expression serious. Dad, I read that this forest is haunted. Sarah chuckled. Have you been looking at those paranormal websites again? No, Mom. It's real history. The park ranger website even mentions it. Ethan leaned forward between the seats. There used to be a logging camp here in the 1890s. A bunch of workers disappeared one winter. They never found the bodies. Well, that's cheerful, I said, forcing a smile. Good thing we don't believe in ghosts, right? Ethan didn't smile back. The Winnebago believed the forest was sacred. They said there were hollow places where the veil is thin, places where things could come through. Things? Sarah asked. Bad things, Ethan whispered. Morgan groaned. Great. Now the little freak is going to have nightmares and I'll have to deal with it. Morgan, Sarah and I snapped in unison. What? It's true. Remember the last camping trip? He woke up screaming 3 times. I was about to defend Ethan when my phone emitted a series of harsh beeps. The GPS had finally given up completely, the screen going black before rebooting. Perfect timing, I muttered. There should be a sign for the campground soon, Sarah said, unfolding a paper map. I'd teased her for bringing it, but now I was grateful. Just keep following this road. It can't be more than a few miles now. The road narrowed further, the pavement giving way to gravel. Potholes appeared with increasing frequency, forcing me to slow to a crawl. A heavy fog had begun to settle over the landscape, unusual for the middle of the afternoon. Through the mist, I could make out the silhouette of a wooden sign. "Finally," I said, pulling over. The weathered sign read Yellow River State Forest, with an arrow pointing down a dirt road to the left. Below it, someone had carved a crude symbol, a circle with a diagonal line through it. "That doesn't look official," Sarah remarked, frowning. "Probably just some local kids vandalizing," I said, though something about the carving made my skin prickle. "This has to be it. The map shows this is the back entrance to the Paint Creek unit." Sarah studied the map again. "I guess so. It's just not what I expected." "Can we go home now?" Morgan asked. "We drove 3 hours to get here," I reminded her. "We're camping." I turned onto the dirt road, the SUV bouncing over exposed roots and rocks. The trees seemed to lean in closer here, their branches creating a canopy so dense that it felt like twilight despite being only 2 p.m. The fog thickened around us, limiting visibility to just a few yards ahead. After about 10 minutes of slow driving, the road opened into a small clearing. There were no official campsite markers, no fire rings, no picnic tables, none of the amenities the state park website had promised. Just a flat, mossy area surrounded by ancient oaks and maples. "This can't be right," Sarah said, double-checking the map. The Paint Creek campground should have designated sites, facilities. "Maybe this is just an overflow area," I suggested, not believing it myself. "Let's get out and stretch our legs. I'll see if I can get the phone working again." As we stepped out of the car, the silence struck me immediately. No birdsong, no distant traffic, not even the sound of wind through the leaves. Just a heavy, waiting stillness that seemed to press against my eardrums. Ethan clung close to my side. "Dad, I don't like it here." "It's fine, buddy," I assured him, ruffling his hair. "Just a little foggy. Probably burn off soon." Sarah approached from the edge of the clearing. "Dan, come look at this." I followed her to a massive oak tree. Carved into its trunk was the same symbol we'd seen on the road sign, a circle with a line through it, but larger and more deliberate. Around it were smaller markings, symbols I didn't recognize. "What is that? Some kind of trail marker?" I asked. "I don't think so," Sarah replied, her voice hushed. "It looks old." Morgan joined us, actually looking interested for the first time. "It's a ward," she said matter-of-factly. When we stared at her, she shrugged. "What? I read things other than social media, you know. It's supposed to keep something out. Or in." Ethan's eyes widened. "The hollow places," he whispered. A twig snapped somewhere in the forest behind us, and we all turned. Through the fog, I could make out a figure approaching, tall and lean, moving with the deliberate gait of someone who knew these woods well. As he came closer, I saw it was an older man, perhaps in his 60s, with a weathered face and sharp, assessing eyes. He wore a flannel shirt and carried a wooden walking stick that looked hand-carved. "You folks lost?" he asked, his voice gravelly. "This ain't a campground." "We were looking for the Paint Creek unit," I explained. "Our GPS led us here." The man's expression darkened. "You're about 3 miles east of there. This here's private property, part of the Hollows." "The Hollows?" Sarah repeated. "That's what we call this stretch. Doesn't show up right on most maps." He looked us over carefully. "Name's Ray Thorson. My family's owned land around here since before it was Iowa." "I'm Daniel Winters. This is my wife, Sarah, our daughter Morgan, and our son Ethan. Sorry for trespassing. We'll head back to the main road." Ray studied us for a moment longer, then sighed. "Too late to send you back now? Fog's rolling in thick. Roads around here ain't safe if you don't know 'em, especially after dark." As if to emphasize his point, the fog swirled more densely around us. I checked my watch, 3:30 p.m. The sun would set in a few hours. "There's a proper clearing about half a mile from here," Ray continued. "You can set up there for the night. I'll point you toward the state park in the morning." I exchanged glances with Sarah. Neither of us was thrilled about camping on a stranger's land, but the fog was disorienting, and the thought of navigating unfamiliar dirt roads in these conditions wasn't appealing. "That's very kind of you," Sarah said. Ray shook his head. "Not kindness. Just don't need the hassle of you folks getting yourselves hurt on my watch." He pointed with his walking stick. "Follow me. Stay close. These woods can be tricky." As we gathered our camping gear from the SUV, I noticed Ray examining the carved symbol on the tree, his expression unreadable. He ran his fingers over the marking, then muttered something under his breath that I couldn't catch. "What's that?" I asked. "Nothing," he replied quickly. "Just an old superstition. Let's move before it gets any darker." We followed Ray single file through the woods, the fog curling around our ankles like ghostly fingers. The path was barely visible, marked only by subtle signs that I wouldn't have noticed without Ray pointing them out. A bent sapling here, a particular arrangement of stones there. "Stay on the path," he warned when Morgan started to drift sideways, distracted by something in the trees. "Some parts of these woods, the ground ain't stable. Sinkholes, caves running underneath." "The hollow places," Ethan whispered again, clutching my hand tighter. After about 20 minutes of walking, longer than the half-mile Ray had promised, we reached another clearing, this one larger and obviously used as a campsite before. There was a stone fire ring in the center and flat areas where tents had clearly been pitched. "This is Fletcher's Meadow," Ray said. "Good spot. Protected." "Protected from what?" Sarah asked. Ray didn't answer directly. "Get your tent up first. I'll help you start a fire. Nights get cold here, even in October." As we set up our large family tent, I noticed more carved symbols on the trees surrounding the clearing, all variations of that same circle and line motif. Ray gathered wood for the fire with surprising efficiency, selecting specific types of branches and arranging them in a careful pattern. "You camp out here often?" I asked him, trying to make conversation. "I don't camp," he said flatly. "I patrol." Before I could ask what he meant, he struck a match and touched it to the kindling. The fire caught immediately, flames leaping higher than seemed natural for freshly gathered wood. For just a moment, I could have sworn the fire burned with a bluish tinge before settling into a normal orange glow. Ray straightened up, satisfaction evident in his face. "That'll hold through the night. Don't let it go out." "We won't," I promised, though something in his tone made it sound more serious than a simple campfire should be. "I'll be back at first light to guide you out," he said, gathering his things. "Few rules while you're here. Don't leave the clearing after dark. Don't answer if you hear someone calling your name from the woods. And if the fire changes color, throw this in." He handed me a small pouch made of rough cloth. I took it, feeling small hard objects inside. "What is it?" "Salt, iron filings, and a few other things. Old family recipe." His expression made it clear he wasn't joking. Morgan snorted. "Seriously? Salt and iron? What are we protecting against, evil fairies?" Ray fixed her with a hard stare. "Mock if you want, girl, but these woods been here longer than any of us. They got their own rules." He turned back to me. "Remember what I said. Stay in the clearing. Keep the fire lit. Don't answer voices. I'll be back at dawn." With that, he turned and disappeared into the fog with surprising speed, leaving us standing around the crackling fire. "Well, he was interesting," Sarah said after a moment. "Total nut job," Morgan declared, already retreating to the tent with her phone. "I'm going to see if I can get signal up high." "He was just trying to scare us," I said, not entirely convinced. "Probably gets a kick out of spooking tourists." Ethan hadn't spoken a word since we'd arrived at the clearing. Now he sat close to the fire, his eyes fixed on the dancing flames. "He's afraid," my son said quietly. "Who?" "Ray." I sat down beside him. "Nah, he's just an eccentric old guy. Probably been telling the same ghost stories for decades." Ethan shook his head. "He's afraid of what lives in the hollow places. the things that come out when the veil is thin. Buddy, those are just stories, I assured him, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. There's nothing in these woods except trees, animals, and the occasional weird old man. Ethan looked up at me, his eyes reflecting the firelight. Then why did he give you that? He pointed to the pouch still clutched in my hand. I didn't have a good answer for that. The rest of the afternoon passed quietly as we finished setting up camp. Sarah organized our supplies while I inflated sleeping pads. Morgan eventually emerged from the tent, complaining about the lack of cell service but seeming slightly less hostile than before. Ethan remained by the fire, occasionally adding small sticks to keep it burning steadily. As dusk approached, we heated canned stew over the fire and ate it with the bread we'd brought. The fog had neither dissipated nor thickened, remaining a constant presence just beyond the edge of our clearing. The temperature dropped noticeably as the sun set, and we all moved closer to the fire's warmth. "So," Sarah said, attempting to lighten the mood, "who wants to tell a ghost story?" "Mom," Morgan groaned. "A weird old guy already did that for us." "I think we've had enough creepy stuff for one day," I agreed. "How about we play 20 questions instead?" We passed the early evening with simple games, and for a while, it felt like a normal family camping trip. But as true darkness fell, the forest around us seemed to press closer. The firelight created a bubble of warmth and visibility, beyond which the night loomed impenetrable. The fog caught the light in strange ways, sometimes appearing to form shapes that dissolved when looked at directly. "Time for bed," I announced around 10 p.m., noticing Ethan's eyelids drooping. "Big day tomorrow. Hopefully, with better weather, we can still salvage this trip." Inside the tent, we arranged ourselves in our usual configuration, Sarah and I on the outer edges with the kids between us. Despite the comfort of modern camping gear, I found myself listening intently to the sounds of the forest. The usual nighttime chorus of insects and frogs seemed subdued, occasionally interrupted by sounds I couldn't identify. Soft creaks and distant rustles that might have been wind through the trees, though the air felt still. I must have eventually drifted off, because the next thing I knew, I was being shaken awake. "Dan," Sarah whispered urgently, "do you hear that?" I blinked in confusion, my mind foggy with sleep. "Hear what?" "Listen." I held my breath and strained my ears. At first, there was nothing. Then, faintly, I caught it, a voice, distant but clear, calling from somewhere in the woods. "Daniel," it called, soft and insistent. "Daniel, help me." I sat up, fully awake now. "What the hell?" "It's been going on for a few minutes," Sarah said, her voice tight with worry. It sounds like your brother." A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the night air. My brother Michael had died in a car accident 3 years ago. "That's not possible," I whispered. "Daniel, please." The voice called again, more desperate now. "I'm lost. I can't find my way out." It did sound like Michael. The same inflection, the same slight catch in the vowels. But it couldn't be. It absolutely couldn't be. I remembered Ray's warning. "Don't answer if you hear someone calling your name from the woods." "It's just the wind," I told Sarah, not believing it myself, or someone trying to mess with us. "No one knows we're here except that Ray guy," she pointed out. The voice came again, and this time it sounded closer. "Daniel, Sarah, help me." Sarah's face paled. "It knows my name now." I checked on the kids, both still asleep, Ethan curled up with his favorite stuffed dinosaur, Morgan with earbuds in despite the lack of signal. "Stay here with them," I said, reaching for the flashlight. "I'm going to check the fire." "Dan, no." Sarah grabbed my arm. "Remember what Ray said. Don't leave the clearing." "I'm not leaving the clearing, just checking the fire. We're supposed to keep it going, remember?" Sarah reluctantly let go of my arm. "Be careful." I unzipped the tent just enough to slip out, zipping it closed behind me. The night air hit me like a wall of ice. far colder than it should have been for October in Iowa. The fire had died down to glowing embers, casting just enough light to see the immediate area around the clearing. The fog had thickened considerably, now swirling at waist height throughout the meadow. Through it, the trees at the edge of the clearing looked distorted, their shapes elongated and twisted. "Daniel," the voice called again, clearly coming from just beyond the tree line. "Please, I'm hurt. I need your help." "Shut up," I muttered, moving to the fire pit. "You're not real." I added wood to the embers, carefully arranging it the way Ray had shown us. As the flames caught and grew higher, the voice from the woods let out what sounded like a hiss of displeasure. The fire blazed up suddenly, and for a brief instant, I saw it again, that unnatural blue tinge to the flames. In that same moment, I glimpsed a figure standing at the edge of the clearing, partially hidden by a large oak tree. It was roughly human-shaped but wrong somehow, its proportions subtly distorted. Though I couldn't make out its face in the darkness, I had the distinct impression it was smiling. My blood turned to ice. I stumbled backward, nearly falling. When I looked again, the figure was gone. Had I imagined it? "Daniel," the voice whispered, now seeming to come from all around me. "Don't you recognize me? It's Michael. I've missed you so much." "My brother is dead," I said through clenched teeth. "Whatever you are, you're not him." A low chuckle emanated from the woods, no longer sounding like Michael at all. "Such certainty, but the veil is thin tonight, Daniel Winters, so very, very thin." I felt a presence behind me and spun around. Nothing was there, but the fire suddenly flared bright blue, the flames leaping 6 feet high. Ray's warning echoed in my mind. Without hesitation, I pulled the small pouch from my pocket and tossed it into the fire. The reaction was immediate and violent. The fire exploded upward with a roar, burning a fierce white blue. A shriek of rage or pain tore through the night, not from any one direction but seemingly from the air itself. The sound raised goosebumps on my arms and made my teeth ache. Then, abruptly, silence fell. The fire settled back to a normal orange glow, and the oppressive feeling that had permeated the clearing lifted. Even the fog seemed to thin slightly. The tent zipper sounded behind me and Sarah's frightened face appeared. "Dan, what was that noise?" "Just the fire popping," I lied, not wanting to frighten her more. "Go back to sleep. Everything's fine." She looked unconvinced but retreated into the tent. I remained by the fire, adding more wood until it blazed brightly. Despite the warmth, I couldn't shake the bone-deep chill that had settled into me. I didn't sleep again that night. Dawn arrived with merciful normality. Birds singing, sunlight filtering through the trees, the fog finally dissipating. The kids emerged from the tent groggy but refreshed, apparently having slept through the entire night's disturbances. Sarah shot me questioning looks but didn't mention the strange events in front of the children. We were eating a breakfast of granola bars when Ray appeared at the edge of the clearing, exactly as promised. He looked us over carefully, his gaze lingering on my exhausted face. "Night went all right?" he asked. "Fine," I lied. "Peaceful." Ray's eyes narrowed slightly. He walked over to inspect the fire pit, crouching down to sift through the ashes with a stick. When he found the charred remains of the pouch, he nodded once, seemingly to himself. "Pack up," he said, straightening. "I'll show you the way back to your vehicle." As the kids and Sarah broke down the tent, Ray pulled me aside. "It spoke to you, didn't it?" he asked quietly, using a voice you'd recognize. I hesitated, then nodded. "My brother. He died a few years ago." Ray sighed heavily. "That's how it works. Finds the cracks in your heart and wiggles in through 'em." "What is it?" I asked. "What's out there?" "Got many names over the years. The Winnebago called it Manhisi, the Hungry One. Early settlers called it the Hollow Man. My family's been keeping it contained for generations." He gestured at the symbols carved into the trees. "These wards mark the boundaries. Usually does the trick, but sometimes when the conditions are right, It can reach through. You're serious about this, I realized, studying his face. Dead serious. That thing's been trapped in the hollow places beneath these woods for centuries. Can't escape completely, but it can influence, can call to people, make them wander off the path. His voice dropped lower. The loggers that disappeared in the 1890s? They heard the voices too, followed them right into the caves. A shudder ran through me. Why tell me this now? Because it chose you, Ray said simply. Once it's got your scent, part of you stays connected to it. You might find yourself dreaming of this place, hearing whispers even when you're far away. He reached into his pocket and pulled out another small pouch, similar to the one I'd thrown into the fire. Keep this with you. Salt and iron won't stop the dreams, but they'll keep it from reaching any deeper. I took the pouch reluctantly. I don't believe in any of this. There has to be a rational explanation. Ray's weathered face broke into a sad smile. That's what they all say at first. He nodded toward my family, now loading the last of our gear into backpacks. Do yourself a favor, Mr. Winters. When you leave these woods today, don't ever come back. And whatever you do, don't answer when it calls. The hike back to our SUV was uneventful, with Ray leading us along a clearer trail than the one we'd taken the previous day. In daylight, the forest seemed ordinary, beautiful, ancient, but just trees and underbrush. Nothing supernatural, nothing hungry. As we reached the vehicle, Ray gave us careful directions to the actual Paint Creek campground. 4 miles west, then north on the paved road. Can't miss it. Thank you for your help, Sarah said sincerely, and for the campsite last night. Ray nodded, his expression grave. Take care of your family, Mrs. Winters. He looked at me meaningfully. Some things, once they get a taste, don't easily let go. With those ominous words, he turned and walked back into the forest, soon disappearing among the trees. Creepy old dude, Morgan commented as we climbed into the SUV. He helped us, I reminded her, starting the engine. The GPS sprang to life, now showing our location accurately. Without him, we'd have been lost in the fog. Dad, Ethan said from the back seat, his voice small. The Hollow Man talked to you last night, didn't it? I nearly swerved off the road. What? Nobody. It was just the wind. I heard it too, he continued calmly. It tried to sound like Grandpa, but it wasn't him. It wasn't anybody real. Sarah turned to stare at our son. Ethan, why didn't you say something? He shrugged. I knew the fire would protect us. The blue flame keeps the hollow things away. I met Sarah's worried eyes, a silent communication passing between us. Later, we'll talk about this later. Well, we're heading to the real campground now, I said with forced cheer. No more weird fog or creepy stories, just regular camping fun. Can we go home instead? Ethan asked quietly. I don't think we should stay in these woods anymore. Part of me wanted to insist on continuing our trip, to prove that the events of the previous night had been nothing but overtired imaginations and an eccentric local playing pranks. But the weight of the pouch in my pocket and the memory of that distorted figure at the edge of the clearing made the decision for me. You know what? That's a good idea. I think we've had enough adventure for one weekend. As we drove away from Yellow River State Forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us leave. In the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of the fog rolling back in among the trees, despite the clear morning sunshine all around us. That night, safe in our own beds 90 miles away, I dreamed of hollow places beneath the earth, of a hunger so ancient and patient it could wait decades for a single taste, of a voice that knew all the names of those I'd loved and lost. And in the morning, I found dirt under my fingernails, though I hadn't worked in the garden. Pine needles in my hair, though there were no pine trees in our yard. The pouch Ray had given me lay open on my nightstand, its contents scattered, and on my bedroom wall, drawn in what looked horribly like dried blood, was a familiar symbol, a circle with a line through it. Only this time, the line was broken. I'm writing this now as a warning. It's been 7 months since our night in the Hollows. The dreams haven't stopped. They've gotten worse. Sometimes I wake up miles from home, standing in the middle of a road, with no memory of how I got there. Sarah says I talk in my sleep, in a voice that doesn't sound like my own. Last week, I found myself researching Yellow River State Forest, looking at maps of the area, planning a return trip. When Sarah caught me, I told her it was for closure. She didn't believe me. We fought about it. She took the kids to her mother's house the next day. They're safer there. The thing that lives in the hollow places has been patient for centuries. It can wait a little longer. It knows I'm coming back. It knows I can't resist the pull much longer. If you're reading this and thinking about camping in northeastern Iowa, stay on the marked trails. Stay out of the fog. And if you see symbols carved into the trees, a circle with a line through it, turn around. Go back the way you came. Some places in this world weren't meant for us. Some hungers never end. And if you hear a voice calling your name from the woods, no matter how familiar it sounds, don't answer.